Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 851, Teleportation Array. The ice altar secretly built by the White Walkers in the underground of Bravos turned out to be a teleportation array, and no one knew where the other end of the teleportation array was connected. But at this moment, a large number of White Walkers rushed out of it frantically. The believers of the evil god cult, the master of this place, reacted and knew that something was wrong. When they wanted to turn around and escape, they were instantly drowned by the surging tide of corpses. They didn't even have time to scream before they were torn into pieces by the corpses and stuffed into their stomachs. The situation has been out of control ever since the disguised White Walker placed a piece of black stone fragment on the altar and the ice blow light began to rise into the sky. The situation in Bravos has been out of control. Although the human side reacted very quickly, the Seeking of Bravos decisively ordered the army to be mobilized to investigate, but it was too late. Go over and see what happened. A commander of the Bravos army ordered his subordinates to go forward to see what happened. Although the subordinate was dissatisfied, he did not dare to refute, so he could only bite the bullet and lead his soldiers to move closer to the light column. This is the Isle of the Gods. Could it be that the gods in the sky finally couldn't stand the suffering of the world and appeared? He led his soldiers, clenched his spears and shields and slowly approached that place. His palms were full of cold sweat. He could only guess in the right direction, because only in this way could he muster the courage to walk over there. However, at this moment, he seemed to hear some chaotic and noisy sounds, which seemed to come from the ground under his feet. What sound? The low-level commander of Bravos was stunned for a moment, but then his feet began to shake violently, and then like a volcanic eruption, a large number of whites gushed out from the ground. Fuck. Gods. The soldiers in front were instantly submerged in the tide of corpses, and the commander of Bravos in the back felt his scalp tingling. He has been staying in Bravos since the long night fell. He has never seen what the White Walkers look like, so how could he have seen such a scene? Don't panic. Don't panic. Hold steady. He waved his sword and loudly ordered his soldiers, but it was useless. The soldiers collapsed in just a moment, and they didn't even have time to react. In fact, it was not that the soldiers of Bravos did not resist stubbornly, but that the incident broke out too suddenly, and no one was mentally prepared. You have to know that the defenders left in Bravos are different from the human coalition soldiers on the Great Grass Sea. Those human soldiers at the forefront are the most elite troops of each city-state, and they have actually fought against the dead army, and have the experience and psychological foundation to deal with these scum. But these people are different. They never thought that one day the dead tide would suddenly break out from the center of Bravos. Therefore, the commander of Bravos shouted desperately and even drew his sword to kill the deserters, but he still couldn't stop the rapid collapse of the army. In the end, he could only stomp his feet and join the ranks of the rout. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Those who stand in the way will die. The commanders of Bravos also began to abandon their positions and flee. The surging corpse tide was naturally unstoppable. The soldiers faced the enemy with their backs. How could they resist? Of course, if even the commanders had taken the lead in fleeing, the remaining Bravos people who wanted to fight to the death and defend their hometown would be helpless. In the end, they could only be drowned by the impact of the corpse tide, and then when the cold wind blew again, they would get up again and become a member of the Night King's army. With the sound of wailing and screaming, people rushed to escape, and the people outside didn't know what was going on, so they crowded together, but the corpse ghosts behind them would not stop, and pounced on them like mad dogs to bite. If you look down from the sky, you can see that the corpse tide is centered on the Isle of the Gods, and then radiates outward continuously. Countless corpse ghosts continue to pour out, and when the biting cold wind blows, there are countless fresh corpse ghosts crawling up from the ground again. What is the situation now? Now the Seeking has fled to the sea by boat. Although there are still many Bravos people who don't know what happened, it is obvious that the Seeking, as the leader of Bravos, is not one of them. He had obtained complete intelligence a long time ago and knew what happened underground in the Isle of the Gods. There is a teleportation array there, or simply the gate of hell, from which a steady stream of whites poured out, as if there is no end. After all, Bravos is the head of the free trade city-state. Although there was a brief panic after encountering the crisis, it quickly calmed down. They first investigated where the accident happened, and then learned that it was the palace of the forgotten little god, the father of waters. Then the faceless men of the House of Black and White were dispatched, and quickly found a believer who did not attend the gathering of the evil god, because he had diarrhea today. The faceless men used some means to get all the information about the whole thing from the other party at the fastest speed, and learned that the White Walkers had set their sights on Bravos a long time ago, and built a secret ice altar under the city. Altar? The Bravos seeking on the Aethero fell into deep thought after hearing the whole story. He has now escaped to the sea, and his own safety has been guaranteed to a certain extent, but of course he did not let the city fall. After all his power comes from here. If Bravos is destroyed, he will be nothing. Therefore, he still dispatched troops, and tried his best to stop the corpse tide from spreading. If we can destroy the altar, is there still a chance to stop the White Walkers? Tormo Frega said, and the people on the ship looked different when they heard his words. In theory, this is of course possible. As long as the altar is destroyed, there are not too many corpses pouring into Bravos through the teleportation array. As long as we take steady steps, there is still a chance to turn the tide. But no one wants to take this task. After all, it is no different from sending oneself to death. Moreover, now that even the corpse tide cannot be stopped, how can we go over these dead people to destroy the altar? I'm willing to go, Lord Seeking. At this time, Tormo Frega's chief swordsman, or thin middle-aged man, gritted his teeth and took the initiative to stand up. But you need to give me a team of death warriors and bring wildfire. Wildfire is an important prop to fight against the White Walkers. The Empire also gave some wildfire to its allies to help them resist the invasion of the White Walkers. However, it was unexpected that it would come in handy at this time. Okay. Tormo Frega looked at the personal guard who had followed him for several years and did not act pretentiously. After all, this was not the time to act pretentiously. He waved his hand to let his men prepare according to the other party's needs. Then the chief swordsman bowed slightly and saluted, and then retreated. Chapter 852, The Fall of Bravos. On the other side of the underground teleportation array in Bravos, there is an unknown land. Benjen, Lyanna and others are waiting in line to enter the teleportation array in the vast tide of corpses. What is the function of this altar? It seems to be different from the ice altar we saw in the land of eternal winter last time. Benjen asked. The last time he was in the land of eternal winter, it was also a land that had never been recorded on human maps. He saw an ice altar built by the White Walkers in an unnamed valley. As for who the gods worshipped by the White Walkers are, no one knows. The Red God cult claims that it is the ancient alien god, that is, the god of darkness, cold and death, but these are just human speculations. No one knows except the White Walkers, not even the White Walkers. Perhaps only the Night King knows what they worship. However, the newly built ice altar this time is different from the one Benjen saw last time. The specific forms of expression are different. One is burning ice flames, and the other is rising light, but the raw material that drives the ice altar is the same. That is, a mysterious oily black stone. This kind of stone is of no use to humans. Perhaps humans have not yet developed its potential. At most, they can wear a small piece of it like Lyanna, so that they can still maintain their sanity when they are revived by the Night King. But this is useless for most people. After all, no one wants to die if they can live. Benjen has been a white for several years and has the most say. He has almost forgotten his identity several times and almost became a white. Therefore, this stone can only fully exert its power in the hands of the White Walkers. Benjen and Lyanna didn't know what would happen after they walked into the light column, but they were carried by the tide of corpses and had no ability to refuse, so they had to bite the bullet and keep moving forward. Then, until the siblings passed through the soaring light column, they felt that all the perception systems around them seemed to have disappeared in an instant. It was dark all around, and you couldn't see your fingers. You couldn't see or hear anything. You didn't even know whether you still existed. It was completely dark and silent. It lasted for an unknown amount of time, which seemed like a few days and a breath. However, the next moment, when Benjamin and Lionel were about to collapse in this extremely silent environment, they suddenly heard chaotic and noisy sounds. Raw, the unconscious whites could endure this long torture when passing through the teleportation array, so they were not affected at all. All the whites who smelled the breath of life were like crazy, roaring and rushing forward desperately. These whites had been hungry for a long time. Because the continent in another location is now lifeless, the famous king of winter, Theon, the hungry wolf, led the army of the dead to flatten that land. They killed everyone there and turned them into a member of the army of death. It's a pity that this strange civilization connected to Westeros, located in another part of the land of eternal winter, disappeared before it came into contact with this world, leaving only the ruins everywhere for future generations to explore the secrets of this lost civilization. However, it is also because of this that the White Walkers destroyed the world on the other side of the land of eternal winter, and there are so many whites coming to Bravos through the teleportation array, because this is not just as simple as destroying a country or a nation, but directly destroying an entire unknown continent at an astonishing rate of destruction. In fact, the same situation is now also true in the hinterland of the central part of the Essos continent. The army of death is expanding rapidly. Before the formation of the coalition, human resistance is simply a mantis trying to stop a chariot. If it weren't for the fact that the Essos continent is so large and the human civilization is relatively more advanced, I'm afraid it would have perished long ago. Where is this? The ruins of a city? Benjen and his sister Lyanna suddenly came to Bravos from another distant continent through the teleportation array. They were still a little confused and didn't know where they were. However, the whites beside them did not let them stay in a daze and constantly dragged them to rush out together. At this moment, Benjen and Lyanna saw a ruined city, collapsed buildings, burning green flames, shocking explosions, chaotic footsteps, and whites everywhere. A figure with a mutilated body stood up from the ground with a rapier on his waist. It was unknown how long the war had been going on. Benjen and Lyanna were among the last to enter the teleportation array, so when they arrived in Bravos, they were not even sure where they were. However, at this moment, a bowstring burst suddenly sounded in the darkness, and a huge crossbow arrow penetrated the darkness and carried a strong wind, aiming at Lyanna and flew over. Get out of the way. Benjen reacted very quickly. He shuddered when he heard the sound, and then threw his sister to the ground. Lyanna hadn't even reacted yet, and a crossbow arrow equipped with a dragon crystal spearhead slammed into the ruins of a burning house next to her. Whites can also save people. A Bravos soldier who was operating a giant crossbow in the distance was so shocked when he saw this scene. They had never thought that a white would actually take the initiative to save people. After suffering a heavy blow, the Bravos people came out of their initial confused state and burst out with a tenacious will. They desperately resisted the rolling tide of corpses and even gained the upper hand at one time, just when the wildfire exploded. However, they were suppressed and continued to retreat. However, the resistance of the Bravos people was not in vain. Viserys ordered all city-states in the human coalition to build giant crossbows as soon as possible. These newly built giant crossbows with human potential played a vital role in conjunction with dragon crystal crossbow arrows. The defenders of Bravos had sniped and killed several White Walkers through giant crossbow hunting. Now all the White Walkers have disappeared. Because of this, Lyanna had just walked out of the teleportation array and had not yet reacted when she encountered a head-on attack. However, all this is no longer important because this war is over. The Night King, who had disappeared for a long time, appeared in the sky of Bravos, riding a huge ice dragon, with an ice crown on his head, ice blue flames burning in his eyes, and calmly looking down at the human city-states below that had already fallen, which several dragon crystal crossbow arrows flew into the sky, but they froze into ice in midair and fell down. Then the ice dragon let out a low roar, and then swooped down from the sky, with surging ice blue flames mixed with frosty white mist pouring down. Sorry, I went to get the certificate today, so I'm a little busy. Chapter 853 Bad News. The Night King appeared in the night sky of Bravos riding an ice dragon, announcing that the war had come to an end. the White Walkers used magical means to manipulate the human coalition and appeared directly in Bravos, destroying a city that was vital to the human camp. When the Sea King saw the appearance of the ice dragon on the sea on the ship Athero, he knew that the war was over, and he ordered the ship to turn around and leave Bravos. On the other side, the Deep Ones got a warship, and Dr. Marwin, Deputy Dean Melisandre and other personnel of the Valyrian Empire boarded the warship. The only White Walker captured in the human world was still imprisoned in a dragon crystal cage, and then tied to the bottom of the ship with chains, and sank in the sea. The Deep Ones were responsible for escorting it, and then it sailed towards Pentus. The war in Bravos ended, and all the dignitaries, wealthy merchants, and keykeeper families living in Bravos fled to Pentus, because now humans have formed a comprehensive alliance, and Pentus is also an important human city second only to Bravos in status. After these people arrived in Pentus, whether they transferred to the capital of the empire, King's Landing, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, or Volantis, it was a later story. Now Dr. Marwin, wearing a dark cloak, stood on the bow and looked at the ice dragon circling under the night sky of the secret city, swooping down from time to time to spit out ice blue dragon flames, and then closed his eyes with a little pain. If only His Majesty the Emperor were here. Dr. Marwin was one of the most accomplished people in magic among humans, at the top of the pyramid, but he had no confidence to face the Night King. After all, the other party had long transcended the mundane realm. The only person in the human world who can stop the Night King is Viserys, and the Night King may also understand this. He suffered from the dragon riders in the Battle of the Green Fork, so he seems to have been avoiding a head-on confrontation with Viserys. The surprise attack on Bravos and the destruction of this extremely important city-state for humans is one of his masterpieces. Now the Bravos people's last courage to resist has completely disappeared. The Sea King has already fled by boat, and ordinary soldiers have no reason to resist. The monks of Bravos are also constantly running in this war, persuading all civilians to leave their homes and flee to the south. The moon singers who once participated in the establishment of Bravos, the red monks of the Church of Vrilla, the believers of the thousand-faced god, etc. all participated in it, which became a vigorous escape, second only to the Great Escape from the North from 292 to 293 in the Egan calendar in human history. However, even so, only a few of the hundreds of thousands of people in Bravos were able to escape. Most people reacted slowly or simply could not outrun the surging corpse tide. They were either knocked down and bitten to death by the whites and eventually became part of the corpse tide, or jumped into the sea and could not swim far before being exhausted and drowned in the sea and sank to the bottom of the sea. Bravos fell. When the news reached the front line, it caused a huge shock. What? How could this happen? The human coalition forces were originally advancing with great momentum, preparing to successively recover the kingdom of Ivervelen and Vizdothrak, and finally cooperate with the Bravos invincible fleet docked in the Lorath colony of Morosi to cross the sea to attack Iban Island, complete the normal battle, and eliminate all the White Walkers. However, the coalition soldiers on the front line never expected that the White Walkers would actually descend from the sky and build a teleportation array under Bravos, and then teleport the vast corpse tide from nowhere directly to the city center of Bravos. The news was confirmed by Viserys. Now the senior leaders of the human coalition also know about the glass candles. After all, they are now working together to save the fate of all mankind, so there is no need to hide them. Glass candles are indeed a very powerful strategic material, but no one can use them except the Valyrians, so the people of other city-states can do nothing, even if they are jealous. The most important thing now is how the coalition should deal with themselves. Should they go forward with all their might, or retreat back and put out the fire behind them first? In fact, this question is very simple, that is, to recapture the city of the Horse King, Vizdothrak, the forest of the kingdom of Ivervelen, and the island of Iban, which has become a dead zone. Which of these cities and lands is more important than Bravos, Pentus, King's Landing, and other places, the bases of the human coalition behind? If these cities are arranged together, I believe the answer is naturally clear at a glance. The land occupied by the White Walkers has now turned into a ruin. Even if it is recaptured, it will not be of much use. At least it will take 10 or 20 years or even longer to restore it to its original state. but Bravos has been destroyed. Let's not talk about it for now, and Pentus, Norvis and other places are at least prosperous cities at present, with a large population and strong productivity. If these places fall, the backbone of mankind will be broken, and even if they want to organize resistance, they may be powerless. Therefore, the whole army has a unified opinion, and naturally understands what to do, but it is easy to talk about rationality, and everyone can distinguish right from wrong, and the difficulty lies in the fact that the rational mind is easily disturbed by emotion. After all, the hometown in front of us cannot be recovered, not to mention that these countries and nations destroyed by the White Walkers have paid a heavy price for all mankind. Fierce disputes broke out again among the coalition forces, and there was even a faint momentum of parting ways. The most desired thing for the Dothraki, who made great contributions in this war, is to recover the Mother Mountain and the holy city of these Dothraki as soon as possible. This is something that Mengo Cal, as the uncrowned king of the Dothraki, cannot stop. This is the emotion of the entire nation. So Killers expressed his apology to Viserys, but she still did not forget to persuade Viserys to go east. To go north, you must go south. To reach the west, you must go east. To advance, you must go back. To reach the light, you must pass through the shadows. Your Majesty, Ashley will be the core of the solution. Quelly suggested Viserys to go to Ashley. She believed that the east had the opportunity to solve the long night and save the fate of the whole world. It was not the first time that Quelly invited Viserys to go to Ashley, but now he really did not have time to spare a trip to Ashley, so he could only nod to show that he understood. However, at this juncture, an envoy who claimed to be from the Golden Kingdom of the Eastern New Land came to visit Viserys. Chapter 854 Mission. Although they were envoys from the Golden Dynasty, they were a large and ragtag army of thousands of people. They wore all kinds of armor and held different weapons. Emissaries from the Golden Dynasty? Viserys was slightly stunned when he heard the report and even did not react. He thought he had heard it wrong. The Golden Dynasty was thousands of miles away from here. Although Viserys knew the name of the Golden Dynasty, he never thought that the other party would send an envoy to meet him. As for Zuang, how this situation turned out was actually a long story. Since the explosion of Karth, the Immortal Palace could not withstand the huge fluctuation of energy, so a big explosion occurred. All the Immortals were killed, and only Zuang escaped from the back door. The Immortal Palace is the core of the wizard's faith. The Immortal Palace exploded and all the Immortals were killed. Of course, the wizards would go crazy when such a thing happened. Therefore, the wizards who now control Karth are crazy and are hunting down Zuang and the entire delegation from the east. They believe that it was this evil Oriental who blew up the Immortal Temple and killed all the Immortals. Zuang and the members of the Golden Dynasty's delegation are certainly not fools. Although Zuang has a clear conscience and the explosion of the Immortal Temple has nothing to do with him, he is the only one who escaped from the explosion. Now he can't defend himself. Therefore, he has to escape first, if he doesn't want to be killed by the crazy wizards. Zuang and the members of the Golden Dynasty's delegation took advantage of the explosion that just happened and everyone didn't have time to react to it. They fled to the ship in a hurry, and then fled Karth on the ship. But after the wizards came to their senses, they certainly didn't let them go, so they sent their best hands to hunt them down. However, when the fuss inside and outside was developing, problems arose inside Karth. The reason is that, since the return of the magic tide, the wizards have gradually regained their lost power, and then reached their peak after the long night, completely mastering all the power in Karth, and suppressing forces including the 13 Giants, the Ancient Guild of Spice, and the Tourmaline Brotherhood. These forces that lost their power were naturally dissatisfied, but they were unable to resist the curse of the wizards, so they could only swallow their anger. However, at this moment, the Immortal Palace suddenly exploded, and all the powerful immortals were killed. The only remaining wizards were some minions except for the person in charge, Bayapuli. Therefore, in the first few days, the 13 Giants, the Ancient Guild of Spice, the Tourmaline Brotherhood and other forces were patient enough to observe for a few days, but when they found that the remaining wizards were all some vulnerable minions, the counterattack of these forces began. They organized people to kill wizards in the street and attack the gathering place of wizards. Even the royal family living in the 1,000 palaces of Karth personally went out to hunt down these wizards. These are enough to show how much wrath and resentment the wizards have caused in the past year of their rule over Karth. Therefore, when they found that the wizard's banner had fallen, many people jumped out and beat the broken drum. The wizards encountered a counterattack from the local forces of Karth, so they had to temporarily slow down the pursuit of Zuaing and others and focus all their attention on internal problems. Now that the magic tide has reached its climax, although the wizards have suffered a major blow, they still have the strength and have not been killed all at once. Therefore, under the leadership of Bayapili, they launched a long stalemate and internal struggle with these forces. The Golden Dynasty's envoys were able to get rid of the pursuit of the wizards and continue to embark on the journey to the west. They collected intelligence while walking and learned that Viserys was now in Koha, so they were overjoyed. The journey to Koha and King's Landing was shortened by more than half for them, so they changed their itinerary and no longer went to King's Landing, but went straight to Slavers Bay. Afterwards, the delegation landed in Meereen, the northernmost city of Slavers Bay, and was warmly welcomed by the local great lords. Slavers Bay opened its doors to do business. Money is everything. They would do business with anyone, and even the Dothraki were their main channel for receiving stolen goods, so they naturally welcomed the visiting envoys. When the great lords of Meereen heard the intention of the Golden Dynasty delegation and knew that their destination was Koha, they did not make it difficult. Even now, the three city-states of Slavers Bay, Meereen, Junfei, and Astapa contributed to the human coalition and sent a lot of slaves to participate in the war. Although these slave soldiers were not enough to go to the battlefield, they were still capable of hard labor such as carrying supplies in the rear. The great lords and good lords of Slavers Bay were not generous or had a conscience. Although these slaves were their property, food was more valuable now. It cost money to keep these people, and it was even more valuable than their own value. It was a pity to kill them, so they simply gave them all to the coalition. In the final analysis, people are a business for the great lords and good lords of Slaver Bay. In a sense, the Night King's view of humans may be similar to that of these slave owners. The great lords of Meereen funded Zuaing and the convoy of the delegation, and then sent their 500-man slave guards, because the land is still more dangerous than the sea, especially for their small team. Those hungry people will target them. However, although the great lords funded the army, they did not provide much food, only about 7 days of food, which even made Zuaing feel that these great lords would be more likely to get rid of them. But he still accepted the gifts from the great lords, and the great lords also equipped him with a translator, who was proficient in the Golden Kingdom language and Valyrian. After a long journey of almost a year, Zuaing also learned a lot of foreign languages, but he was not proficient in them, and could only communicate reluctantly, so it was of great help to have a translator. Afterwards, the former scout captain of the 5 fortresses of the Celestial Empire picked up his old profession. Leading troops to fight was what he was really good at. The diplomatic mission was completely a risky undertaking, so he led these 500 skinny slave soldiers on the journey. During this period, they experienced some hardships, as well as critical moments, and participated in several wars, some of which were battles with the White Walkers, but more were with other humans. Zuaing led his soldiers to fight and learn in this strange land, and gradually understood what had happened here. They gathered some refugees and defeated troops along the way, and when they finally found Viserys, they had actually multiplied the original number of people several times to a scale of 3,000. This man is a talent. When Viserys heard these things, he couldn't help but be a little surprised. Chapter 855 Bushel's Gaze Handwritten Letter. Zuaing was also a little excited when he met Viserys, because he had been drifting on the sea for a year, just to complete the task assigned to him by the Emperor, and to go to the western regions, to meet the Emperor who founded the Valyrian Empire in the legend. In fact, although Zuaing had never seen Viserys before, he had already heard of his name along the way. He was hailed as the leader of human resistance to the White Walkers, and shouldered the hopes of everyone, so Zuaing also had a preconceived understanding of the other party. He felt that Viserys should be a mature and stable emperor with broad shoulders and firm eyes, so that he could shoulder the hopes of mankind. He should have a grey beard, an old but still strong physique, holding a golden scepter symbolizing power, and his scepter pointed to the rolling army. By the way, he has silver hair and purple eyes, which he has heard of. It is said that people with noble Valyrian blood have such physical characteristics. However, when Zuang saw Viserys, he was shocked. He did not expect that this man who was praised, worshipped, and even praised as the last light and hope of womankind by all Westerners, was actually a handsome young man under 30 years old. He did have long silver gold hair and a pair of lavender eyes, but when Viserys cast his eyes on him, Zuang actually felt as if he was facing a great enemy. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He was not so nervous even when facing the monsters in the Grey Wasteland, because he saw Viserys' cheek and suddenly thought of a terrible fact. It's him. Zuang had seen him in the illusion of the Immortal Palace. The silver-haired young man who sat on the Iron Throne with his head down, not knowing whether he was dead or alive, had a dead dragon's head hanging on the upper left of his head. Your Majesty. However, Zuang's heartbeat kept accelerating, but he still took a deep breath and pretended to be calm, calmed his emotions, and then bowed deeply and spoke in the poor Valyrian language full of regional style. I come from the Golden Dynasty in the East. On behalf of Bugay, the 17th Emperor of the Azure Dynasty, I extend my sincerest greetings to you. Zuang's words sounded a bit rigid and even funny, but because of the language barrier, it was already very perfect for him to say this. Viserys listened to Zuang's poor accent and looked at his familiar outfit. He was silent for a while and then suddenly spoke. Speak in your language. I can understand. Your Majesty. Viserys suddenly switched to speaking in fluent Golden Dynasty language, which really shocked Zuang, and the other people in the tent were also shocked, but then they thought of Viserys' language talent, and it was not surprising. It was no longer a question that the young emperor was a genius. Viserys himself knew many different languages, and could communicate freely with giants, children of the forest, Dothraki, and even knew many dialects of Valyrian. It was not strange that he had learned the language of the Golden Kingdom without knowing when. Zuang was startled. It was unexpected that the other party suddenly spoke his native language. He even thought for a second that the man in front of him was the wizard Bayapuri. Bayapuri could speak fluent Yeti language at the time, and he did not show mercy when he chased them. Zuang almost died in the hands of the other party. Your Majesty, this is the handwritten letter from the Emperor. Since the language is the same, there is no obstacle to communication. Zuang was also relieved and handed over the handwritten letter from the Emperor Bugay. There is actually no specific content in Bugay's letter. It is roughly that the long night is coming, and the two empires of the East and the West should work together to deal with it. However, in fact, due to the separation of the Skeleton Mountains, the interaction between Eastern and Western civilizations is still in the initial stage. They know each other's existence, but have little contact. Bugay wanted to promote the exchange of Eastern and Western civilizations from the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Golden Dynasty and the Valyrian Empire. Zuang was the envoy he sent out, and would stay in the West in the future. As an envoy of the Golden Dynasty, Zuang had no idea that their emperor had cut off his retreat. In the letter, Bugay also expressed the hope that the empire would also send an envoy to Yadu to promote friendly exchanges between civilizations and jointly resist difficulties, and even invite Viserys himself. In fact, Bugay's next words have already revealed his true intention. His real purpose is not the so-called exchange or mutual help, but to use external forces to enter Yadu and help him regain the lost power. Because the imperial court is weak, local forces are rising, and the General Bozayang and others have already declared themselves kings. The emperor's decrees cannot be issued outside Yadu. In fact, Bugay has been driven into a desperate situation. Of course, Viserys is not aware of this, but he seems to be able to vaguely guess the final madness of the writer when he looks at this letter. He has been forbearing for a long time and wants to take this God-given opportunity to fight back. This person is not simple. Viserys finished reading the handwritten letter from the Emperor Bugay, and then sighed sincerely. Originally, this letter was to be translated. After all, the whole letter was written in Oriental characters. However, Viserys read it word by word. Although there were some stumblings, there was no overall obstacle, and he could probably understand the meaning of the letter. Seeing this scene, Zhuang felt that this young man with silver gold hair was a little unfathomable. He was just a warrior and his knowledge was not very profound, but this foreign emperor knew his country's culture better than him. After reading the handwritten letter from Bugay, Viserys was somewhat tempted to visit Yedo, even though he had a vague idea of his intention. He also wanted to see the hometown of this world. Then he thought of how Kui Lizard had persuaded him to visit Asia several times, and he was even more shaken. In the future, when there are not so many things to do, he can go to the east. But it is definitely not possible now. After all, the crisis of the long night has not dissipated. He can't just run around. He must stop the Night King from destroying the world first. Your Majesty, in addition to the handwritten letter from the Emperor, I have something else I want to talk to you about alone. However, at this moment, Zhuang was silent for a long time and did enough psychological and ideological work. Then he finally plucked up the courage to speak in the Yiddi language that no one else could understand. He knew that the Emperor could understand it. Zhuang wanted to tell him about what he had seen Viserys and the prophecy of the Immortal Palace. Viserys had just put the handwritten letter from Bugay on the table after reading it. He was slightly startled when he heard Zhuang's words, and then nodded. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 856 Conversation. I don't know why the wizard chose me and let me enter the House of the Undying to meet the Immortals. In fact, I don't know why the House of the Undying exploded. And I don't know why I can't see the prophecies about myself in the House of the Undying, but all I see are some strange dreams. In the coalition camp stationed on the Great Grass Sea, the division of the coalition was finally suppressed by Viserys alone, because now that humans can't unite, I'm afraid that the time of destruction is just around the corner. Now since the coalition received the news of the attack on Bravos, it has begun to retreat slowly, abandoning all the land that has been recovered so far, and retreating towards the direction of Koha's base camp. They must put out the fire in the rear before they can continue the eastward expedition, otherwise blindly changing homes is just a way to die. After all, it is just a land that the White Walkers have attacked, not the home of the White Walkers. However, the core of the human coalition is in these city-states on both sides of the narrow sea. Therefore, the coalition's choice to retreat was recognized by most people. Although it once faced a split situation, Viserys played a key role in it in the end. After all, he has long been regarded as the leader of humans to resist the White Walkers. The woodmen stopped clamoring to go home, and the Dothraki also forbade and did not demand to retake the Holy City and the Mother Mountain. This group of barbaric nomads was originally the disease of the entire Essos continent and was hailed as the destroyer of civilization. They were barbaric, fierce, and burned, killed, and looted. However, after experiencing the baptism of the Long Night, sharing weal and woe, and supporting each other with all countries and nations, they seemed to have been influenced and learned to understand and respect each other. In the temporary camp, built by the coalition forces after retreating, a Dothraki with long braids can be seen communicating with a long axe guard from Norvus in Port Valyrian. The two sat on the ground, clinked their glasses, and drank them all. Of course, they were definitely not drinking wine. Since the long night came, the food shortage has been used for stored food. People can only eat one meal a day, and wine is even more of a luxury. Only the nobles have a little stock at home, and ordinary people certainly can't afford to drink wine. After the meeting, Zhuang found Viserys alone, because he had just said that he wanted to talk to Viserys alone, and then he told all the visions he had seen in the Undying Palace. He didn't know why he entered the Undying Palace, but the prophecies and visions he saw had nothing to do with him. They all described the Targaryen family, or did the visions have something to do with him? But Zhuang didn't know. Zhuang was a little confused, but when he told Viserys everything, the silver-haired young man fell into deep thought, and then suddenly said something out of nowhere. It turned out to be you. What? Zuang was slightly stunned and didn't know what Viserys was talking about, and Viserys shook his head without explaining. He once had a nightmare in which he dreamed that Balerion died, the dragon soul merged with himself, and he became a dragon, and took the last step. At that time, when Viserys stood up from the ground, he looked back and saw a figure wearing oriental armor in the distance, but in the dream, Viserys didn't see who the other person was. But after meeting Zuang and hearing his description, Viserys realized that the scout captain from the east was the one he saw in his nightmare. And the last illusion described by Zuang was exactly the same as the scene Viserys dreamed of in his dream, and the time point was quite consistent. It seemed that the mysterious power of the Immortal Palace briefly connected the two people together at that time, and they were in the same illusion. Viserys thought about it, but he couldn't figure it out. After all, he didn't understand the wizard, and didn't understand what the other party's power system was. Moreover, Zuang also said that the Immortal Palace had been destroyed after he escaped, and all the immortals were killed. Even if Viserys wanted to find the Immortal Palace or the immortals to understand the truth, he was powerless. However, although Viserys couldn't figure it out, what Zuang said attracted his attention. Immortal Palace according to Viserys' understanding, in the original trajectory, his sister Daenerys once led the remains of Khal Drogo to here, and Daenerys was also invited to enter the Immortal Palace. She saw 7 visions, some true and some false, but they successfully predicted the War of the Five Kings, the Red Wedding, and Daenerys' childhood in Bravos, her and Viserys' father Aerys II, and their elder brother Rhaegar Targaryen. The immortals also made a prophecy about Daenerys at that time. You are destined to light 3 flames, one for life, one for death, and one for love. You are destined to ride 3 mounts, one for bed, one for terror, and one for love. You are destined to experience 3 betrayals, one for blood, one for wealth, and one for love. Most of the predictions of the Immortal House and the Immortals hit what will happen to Daenerys in the future. Therefore, although they did not predict that she would be burned to death by the Black Dragon in their original trajectory, and did not predict that she would be blown up by the Immortal House in the current world, Viserys did not dare to ignore the predictions they made. As for why the immortals chose Zuang, and why Zuang saw so many illusions about their family and even himself in the Immortal Palace, Viserys was not sure. But if you think about it carefully, the answer is not difficult to understand. Viserys thought of the handwritten letter written by Bugay, the emperor of the Azure dynasty, to himself. In the letter, he hoped that Viserys could keep Zuang by his side as a helper, and at the same time, hoped that Viserys could send someone to the Celestial dynasty. Viserys did not pay much attention to this at the beginning. Although Zuang was indeed a talent, he led 500 slave soldiers alone to travel through mountains and rivers, and beat more and more people, but this was still not enough for Viserys to keep him by his side. However, after hearing about Zuang's experience in the Immortal Palace, Viserys could not help but pay attention to it. This person might play a key role in the future, which is why he predicted so many things related to himself. Stay. Then Viserys was silent for a moment and spoke again abruptly. Zuang was slightly startled and seemed not to understand. Viserys handed the Emperor Bugay's handwritten letter to the other party. After taking it, he looked at it for a few seconds, then fell silent, with a little redness in his eyes. Chapter 857 Prophecy. Zuang originally thought that he could return to his hometown after completing his mission, but he did not expect that the Emperor would order him to stay in a foreign land. In fact, the Emperor Bugay had never met Zuang. Although the Emperor was weak now, a small lieutenant could not disobey the Emperor's edict. He was like a doll that could be manipulated at will, and the other party's thoughts could determine Zuang's fate. Of course, this does not mean that Bugay is a bad person. In fact, such things happen all over the world. The upper one can decide the fate of the lower one with a word, even if everyone has been suffering for decades before growing up. Viserys also sent thousands of Imperial Navy south to the Summer Sea to visit Nars Island with an edict. In the end, these soldiers from King's Landing and nearby areas stayed on the Summer Islands. And Asher Greyjoy, the chief envoy of the mission, also became the Queen of the Summer Islands. Because of his pioneering work, Viserys canonized the first Grand Duke since the establishment of the Other Empire, and also a female Grand Duchess. The Summer Islands also became a principality affiliated to the Valyrian Empire. The fate of these people was also changed by Viserys' will. Otherwise, these soldiers might have married and had children in their hometowns and lived a happy life. Of course, they might have starved to death in this long night. These are all possible. Although food was properly distributed in the empire, there were still cases of starvation. It was just that outside King's Landing, the influence of the Iron Throne was now weakening, and everyone was trying to survive. However, compared with other people whose fates were controlled by others, Zuang was lucky to meet Viserys. Although Viserys did not consider himself a wise ruler, he was still very good to those who were loyal to him. Especially Viserys could speak the language of the Yi Land, which made Zuang feel at ease. The distant west was not completely a strange place with a dark vision. Zuang still had his wife and children in the Golden Dynasty, and he would send someone back to pick them up. However, after a long night, it was very dangerous on the road and on the sea, and the wizard didn't know whether he would continue to hunt him down. As an envoy of the Golden Dynasty, Zuang stayed with Viserys as a foreign minister of the Valyrian Empire. Although the troops he brought were all old, weak, sick and disabled, they were also incorporated into the human coalition and received their iron rice bowl. Although the long night is now shrouded in an extremely short supply of food, the soldiers fighting for the coalition will definitely have food to eat and will not starve to death. These are all provided by the major city-states, nobles, and wealthy businessmen. Therefore, Zuang can be regarded as an explanation to these subordinates who have been gathered along the way. Then the mighty coalition continued to retreat in the direction of Koha and once again handed over the land that was finally regained. However, there was nothing to regret. After all, these lands occupied by the White Walkers had almost no use value. The coalition retreated in the direction of Koha, but Viserys did not retreat with the army. He rode a dragon and flew directly to Bravos. Viserys did not know what crucial role Zuang, the Eastern general, would provide for this war. Perhaps he would kill the Night King himself. Maybe he will command the army to make a Gidi come back. Or maybe his mission is to tell Viserys the vision he saw in the Immortal Palace. This is the crucial role he plays. His mission is to be a carrier of information. Of course, these are all disturbing speculations. When he is at the core of the coalition, a large amount of intelligence comes in every day, and Viserys has to extract some useful things from these intelligence. But there is no doubt that Zuang's reminder did make him calm down a lot, and he also had some vague predictions about the future. First of all, Valyrian may encounter some dangers. This has repeatedly reminded Viserys that his black dragon may fall in this war, so Viserys must be more careful about this. And then there is the city that will be destroyed in the future decisive battle. Viserys thought it was Bravos when he first heard it, but later he thought carefully that it might not be there, but somewhere else. In addition to these two key elements for the Battle of Dawn, the next thing is what may happen in the future. There may be a war in King's Landing, and the silver-haired woman on the Great Wall. Viserys thought that, if he was still alive, there would be no war in King's Landing, but no one could predict the future. Would he die in a battle in the future? For example, the war with the White Walkers was imminent. If Viserys saw the silver-haired woman on the wall himself, he might recognize her, but Zuang couldn't. He only saw her back. Viserys initially thought it would be his wife Daenerys, but he didn't know why Daenerys would wear the 5-dragon crown in the future. However, he then thought of another possibility, that is, his eldest daughter Diana, who inherited Viserys' bloodline and also had silver gold hair, and in her generation, dragons had 5 heads. It is difficult to guess what will happen in the future. After all, the current crisis has not been overcome. Viserys repeatedly pondered the prophecy that Zuang brought him. He was riding on the back of a dragon and embarking on a journey to Bravos, with the cold wind blowing in his ears and his long silver gold hair fluttering. After all, the abilities of the old gods in the East continent have failed, and Viserys is now in danger without the fragmented prophetic ability. Perhaps it is for this reason that the Night King did not choose to start a war in Westeros and attack the Great Wall directly, but to lure Viserys out of the land of Westeros first. If Viserys does not leave Westeros, it will be extremely difficult for the Night King to defeat or kill him, because although Viserys' fragmented prophetic ability can only see some fragments, it also has a significant impact on the future. If he encounters danger, he will slip away or respond in advance, and the Night King can't catch the flaw at all. Egan Calendar 301. A few days after Bravos was attacked and fell by the White Walkers, under the dark sky, the entire land that was once prosperous and lively has now fallen into darkness, lifeless. But at this moment, a dragon roar suddenly came from the sky above. Viserys I Targaryen, the emperor of the Valyrian Empire, who led the army in person, was clad in silver dragon steel armor, holding a dragon lance, and flew to the sky above this lost land on his mount, the Black Dragon Balerion. Chapter 858 Loras. Where is the Night King? Viserys rode a black dragon and soared in the sky, his eyes as bright as torches overlooking the dark city below. Because of Balerion's roar just now, the ruins were filled with the cries of the awakened whites. Bravos has become like this. The Titan, known as one of the 9 man-made wonders, still stood at the mouth of Bravos, straddling 2 small islands, holding up a broken sword and seeming to roar to the sky, but the neck of the giant was empty, still a headless giant. The initiator of this incident was the young founding emperor who was now soaring in the sky of Bravos. In a rage, Viserys attacked Bravos at night and cut off the head of the Titan with dragon flames, which fell into the sea, shocking all the people of Bravos. Later, the Bravos people chose to swallow their anger and salvage the Titan's head from the bottom of the sea. However, in order to commemorate this shameful experience, the Bravos people did not put the salvaged Titan's head back on its original body, but placed it in the center of the city center square. However, today, the Titan is still there, and the giant's head is still lying quietly in the central square, but the Bravos people who passionately called for remembering this shameful history are gone. Some of them fled to Pentus, Loras by boat, and even fled to Norvus by land, while more of them became part of the army of whites. But Viserys now flew over Bravos to find trouble with the Night King. When he saw the miserable situation of Bravos today, he did not gloat over it, but instead felt some sadness. After all, he still understood the principle of lips and teeth being cold. Bravos is an important part of the human alliance, but it was destroyed by the attack of the White Walkers. Since the turn of the century, in the 300th year of the Egan calendar, the new era has opened a tragic page. Since the Valyrian era, the whole world has never been so chaotic. Even in the bloody century of the Empire era after the destruction of the Freehold, the population of the whole world has not experienced such a serious sharp decline in such a short period of time. Viserys swooped down from the sky on the Black Dragon Balerion, and burned some of the whites to vent his anger. He originally wanted to settle accounts with the Night King. After all, the other party had been hiding from him for a long time. It took him several days to fly back from the Great Grass Sea, which was fast enough, but the Night King left Bravos before him. It was useless to burn these whites blindly to vent his anger. In fact, the Night King could sacrifice 200,000 whites to lure the main force of the human coalition to the east, and he didn't care about these small sacrifices at all. After all, the source of the Night King's soldiers came from humans. This is a process of one rising and the other falling. It doesn't care about the loss at all, and doesn't care about the life and death of these whites. Anyway, they are already dead. Where will it go? In the sky of the fallen Bravos, a silver-haired young man wearing silver armor rode on the back of a dragon and fell into deep thought. However, the answer is not difficult to guess. He appeared in Bravos a few days ago, and now the main force of the White Army in Bravos has disappeared. There are only 2 most likely places to go, either Andalus or Loras. When Viserys flew from the Great Grass Sea, he passed over Norvus and Andalus. Now these 2 important human cities are still safe, so the direction where the Night King went is clear at a glance. Then the dragon roar sounded again in the sky. The Black Dragon set a big fire in Bravos City and flew towards Loras, which is not far away. And now Loras. This is the smallest, poorest, least populated, most backward and most isolated of the free trade cities. Although it has a large number of fishing fleets, the Loras people rarely build warships and their military strength is quite weak. They are located in the north of Essos, at the westernmost end of the largest main island in a cluster of islands in the Trembling Sea, with their backs against the Bay of Loras, west of the Axe Peninsula and east of Bravos. Splash! However, now, a white-haired White Walker first emerged from the water, and the sea water dripped down along his hair, followed by an endless tide of corpses, all coming out of the vast dark sea water. It has only been a few days since Bravos was attacked. Viserys can pass the news through the connection between the Black Mist, and although Bravos and Loras are close, it still takes time to pass. The news that Bravos was attacked and destroyed by the White Walkers has just reached Loras, and the people of Loras have not even reacted before the White Walkers have already hit them. The endless tide of corpses came out of the sea, and then they kept howling like mad dogs, and rushed towards this city that spans 3 main islands and dozens of uninhabitable islands and reefs. Then the sound of horns sounded above Loras. White Walkers are coming. White Walkers are coming. The corpses that emerged from the sea rushed directly towards Loras without hiding, and the soldiers in Loras naturally found the traces of the White Walkers easily, and then sounded the alarm. Although Loras's overall strength is at the bottom among the free trade cities, it is a huge city-state with tall walls after all, so it was relatively calm at the beginning when facing the attack of the White Walkers. Stop them. Stop them. The commanders on the top of the city shouted at their soldiers, ordering them to insert the arrows into the kerosene, wrap them in a layer of kerosene, and then put them on the bonfire to light them, and then all raised their bows and arrows at a 45-degree angle, and then a round of volleys, and the overwhelming rain of arrows fell towards the rolling corpses. Puff puff puff. Many corpses like mad dogs were shot, and fell to the ground during the charge, but the dead army was different from humans. No one cared about the feelings of their companions, and they stepped on their bodies, and continued to rush forward. Therefore, the rain of arrows from the top of the city of Loras did not hinder the speed of the army of the dead. Almost in an instant, the dark tide of corpses surged to the bottom of the city. They made a terrifying howl, and piled up into a mountain of people, constantly climbing over the city wall. Where had the defenders of Loras seen such a scene? These were actually things that the Westeros army had experienced many years ago. At that time, the army of the Seven Kingdoms had lost the north and the neck from the Great Wall to Winterfell, but they had accumulated experience. And now the defenders of Loras had indeed seen the White Walkers for the first time, just like when King Robert led the coalition forces to encounter the White Walkers in the first battle. They were directly crushed and defeated. Retreat. The 3 princes of Loras's harvest, fishermen, and streets, as well as the senior officials of the governor's council, were all panicked. But at this moment, the roar of a giant dragon sounded in the sky of Loras. Then a guard stumbled in from outside, claiming that 2 dragons were fighting in the sky of Loras. Chapter 859 Night King. What? 2 dragons are fighting in the sky? Hearing the guards who broke in, all the governors and 3 princes in the governor's council of Loras looked at each other. They didn't expect such a thing to happen, and then they looked at each other again. Take me to see. One of the leading governors of Loras said after a pause, and the other governors and 3 princes followed him out. When they walked outside and looked up at the sky, they saw that under the white sky, covered by wind and snow, there seemed to be 2 giant beasts fighting in the clouds, with the light of dragon flames flickering and roaring continuously. 2 dragons are fighting. One of them must be our dragon. Seeing such a scene with their own eyes, all the governors and princes of Loras were a little excited, because in such a desperate situation, seeing this scene was like seeing the dawn of hope. After all, now that the enemy army is approaching, if they can defend their hometown, no one will want to escape. Is this dragon rider the emperor? Viserys Targaryen? If he is here, has the coalition arrived now? The fierce battle in the sky brought hope to everyone. They talked excitedly. The emperor of the Valyrian Empire was the commander of the entire human coalition. His appearance here made these people mistakenly believe that the coalition had arrived in Loras, and there was still hope for this war. However, the surroundings were in chaos, but the governor of Loras, named Tristan, seemed very calm, because what they expected was actually impossible to think about. Not long ago, they received the news of the great victory in Gunassi. The coalition defeated 200,000 dead legions in Gunassi, and burned them all to ashes. Unless they turned back immediately after the battle, the main force of the human coalition might not even have left the Great Grass Sea. In fact, Governor Tristan guessed correctly. The senior leaders of the coalition did not have a clairvoyant, and they could not predict what would happen later, and they would not predict that Bravos was attacked. Now everyone is in the fog of war, so naturally there is no way to retreat in advance to stop the main force of the dead army that attacked Bravos from continuing to wreak havoc in the heart of humanity. Calm down, everyone. Governor Tristan, who was wearing a velvet robe and had a little grey hair, spoke at this time. He did not hesitate to pour a basin of cold water on everyone. Think carefully, unless the coalition forces have wings, it is impossible to fly to Loreth now. His words were simple and rough, but they worked. His cold water instantly calmed everyone down. Because this was a very clear fact, but these people barely saw a life-saving straw in despair and rushed to grab it, thus ignoring the logic of reality. The dragon in the sky is most likely the mount of the Emperor of the Empire. He may have arrived here and is fighting the enemy's ice dragon, but he can't save Loreth's fate. The existence of dragons is an important factor affecting the war situation, but it cannot determine the outcome of a war. In the final analysis, wars still rely on soldiers to fight, otherwise there is no need to send troops in the war. Just sending out dragons can solve the battle. Only 10 cows are consumed per 100 kilometers, which is economical and cost effective. Retreat. The fleet of Bravos has arrived. Let's go to Northus. Although the city-state of Bravos has been destroyed in the war between humans and the White Walkers, many of Bravos' ships have escaped. Most of them are now in Pentus, and a few have come to Loris. The fleet that Tristan is talking about now is the Bravos fleet that once attacked Iban and wanted to cut off the White Walkers' retreat, but was attacked below the sea. They later retreated to Merohi. After the destruction of Bravos, this part of the fleet stationed in Merohi retreated to the direction of Loris and happened to catch up with the attack of the White Walkers on Loris, so they were constantly loading Loris's civilians to the mainland and fleeing towards Northus. Loris, who was caught in the flames of war on the ground, was still struggling to hold on, and in the sky, Viserys rushed to Bravos and found no one. Then flew to the direction of Loris and happened to encounter the White Walkers who were launching a fierce attack on this island city. Viserys also encountered the Night King, whom he had been tracking hard, riding an ice dragon, and happened to be near Loris. I caught you. The silver-haired and silver-armored dragon rider caught the trace of the Night King in the endless night and clenched the dragon spear in his hand. The other party rode an ice dragon and merged with the wind and snow and seemed to be observing the situation of Loris below. However, at this moment, the Night King seemed to have a feeling in his heart, raised his head, and looked diagonally upward, just in time to meet Viserys' eyes. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the ice blue flame shook slightly. Who the black dragon under the human dragon rider received the order from his companion, and a thick white mist filled with sulfur and burnt smell came out of its thick nostrils, and its scalded eyes flashed with dangerous light. Roar, then it suddenly roared, and pounced towards the ice dragon. The two giant dragons, one ice and one fire, looked very close in the air, but in fact they were more than 10 kilometers apart. Balerion pounced down from the sky towards the ice dragon, and the ice dragon was not afraid. Its eyes showed fierceness, and it also roared, and then went straight to meet it. The ice dragon that the Night King rode was much larger than the two ice dragons that attacked the wall not long ago, and was even larger than Balerion. Its body was covered with thick ice scales, so it was naturally fearless. The black dragon was extremely fast, shuttling through the clouds and mist like a black lightning, and then opened its huge mouth, and a deep purple light lit up in its throat. The next second, dark dragon flames suddenly poured down. The dragon flames of the giant dragon are similar to the color of its body to a large extent, so Balerion has become more and more like the Black Death. Its dragon flames have turned into dark purple, close to black dragon flames. The ice dragon is also not afraid of the dragon flames spewed by the black dragon. It opened its bloody mouth and spewed white ice mist and ice blue flames upwards. The dragon flames of both sides collided violently, and a violent and continuous roar broke out. Rumble. The two dragon flames of ice and fire were evenly matched in the night sky, and the sparks from the collision and fall were like fireworks all over the sky, directly lighting up the dark night above Loris. Almost all the Loris people saw it, so they all raised their heads and looked up at the sky. Chapter 860. Both sides suffer. The two dragons were both extremely large, with wings that were almost as long as their tails to their heads when they were spread out, nearly 100 meters long, but still small in the darkness and snow. Although Balerion grew very fast, as his total tonnage increased, his length gradually slowed down, and the scales on his body gradually became rough, no longer shiny, but stronger. This also marked that Balerion had entered adulthood from adolescence. A dragon would not stop growing throughout its life, but after adulthood, its growth rate was still not as fast as that of a teenager, and it tended to grow horizontally, becoming stronger and thicker in scales. The two dragons circled and danced rapidly in the sky. The fight between Balerion and the huge ice dragon was more impactful than the fight between Regal and Viserion on the wall against two smaller ice dragons. The visual impact of adult dragons, the violent aesthetics, the fierce physical collision, and the dragon flame bombardment all made people's adrenaline soar, and then they were deeply afraid. As for the dragon rider flying in the sky, Viserys grabbed the saddle ring with one hand, the wind whistled in his ears, the cold wind mixed with heavy snow blew on his face like a knife, and his silver gold hair fluttered. He raised his hand and crushed the ice spear thrown by the Night King, making the opponent's eyes slightly condensed, and the ice blue flames in his eyes swayed. Viserys crushed the ice spear thrown by the Night King, then rode on the dragon's back and gently stroked his companions under him, exhaled a breath of turbid air, and looked at his enemy with a torch-like gaze. Balerion was injured. In the fight just now, it was accidentally bitten on the hind leg by the opponent, and the hard scales were crushed by the ice dragon's sharp teeth, and pierced into the flesh and blood. The hot dragon blood fell from the sky, and spilled into the city of Loras below. However, although the black dragon was injured in the fight just now, the opponent did not get any benefits either. When Balerion's hind legs were bitten, he also opened his mouth and bit the opponent's neck, almost biting the ice dragon's neck off. Under the dark sky, the two fighting dragons fell from the sky, like two meteorites falling from the sky. The sound of flapping wings was mixed with roars, and then there was a loud bang. The injured black dragon landed hard on the second largest main island of the lawless city-state, Lawless Island. There is an ancient and huge maze on Lawless Island. The maze occupies 3/4 of the island's area, including underground structures. Viserys wanted to avoid this huge maze when he was driving Balerion from the sky, but failed, so he was forced to land in the maze. Balerion landed with a loud roar, the earth shook violently, and the stone walls of the ancient maze, that had been there for who knows how many years, collapsed. Smoke and dust spread instantly, and the area where the dragon landed became a ruin. The black dragon had already injured one of its hind legs, and then it fell from the sky and smashed a maze. It screamed in pain. On the other side, the ice dragon and the white walker king on the dragon's back, who also fell from the sky and fought with it, did not fall to the ground. Instead, after a loud bang, they set off huge waves and plunged into the cold sea water. Balerion, Viserys, who was sitting on the dragon's back, fell from the sky with Balerion. He was not injured, but was a little dusty after smashing the ancient maze. He could clearly feel the pain and grievance transmitted through telepathy. Viserys also felt a little distressed. He jumped off the dragon's back and stroked Balerion's head. Balerion was rarely injured so seriously. The last time was in the ruins of Illyria. They landed near the Sea of Sighs and rested for half a month. Where is the Night King? Will he drown if he falls into the sea? After calming Balerion's emotions, Viserys turned his head and looked at the sea in the distance. At this moment, the airwave caused by Balerion falling and smashing the maze had not dissipated. Viserys had just seen the Night King and his ice dragon fall into the sea. He hoped that the Night King would drown directly in the sea, but this was just a thought. Ordinary White Walkers would not drown, let alone the leader of the White Walkers. However, just as Viserys was thinking, a thin layer of ice suddenly appeared at the place where the Night King and the ice dragon fell into the sea in the distance, like grey fog. Then the next second, the Night King rode the ice dragon out of the water under the sea and flew directly into the sky. Roar, when enemies meet, they are particularly jealous. Balerion, who was lying on the ground licking his wounds, felt the breath of the ice dragon appear again and immediately raised his head. His scalded eyes were full of murderous intent, and he let out a low roar. Balerion did not think that he had lost in the battle just now. Then he flapped his huge wings and raised his slender neck high, as if he wanted to fight with the opponent again. However, the Night King and the Ice Dragon did not seem to want to fight Balerion again. Of course, they saw that Poliwian was injured, and the scarlet dragon blood was still flowing out at this moment. It took only a short while to dye the line under the black dragon red. But it was unknown whether it was because the ice dragon was more seriously injured or for other reasons. A large piece of flesh was directly torn off the place where Poliwian had just bitten the ice dragon, and the neck was almost bitten off. The Night King rode on the back of the ice dragon, with the ice crown that had been repaired after many years on his head and the ancient stone sword on his back. He looked down coldly at Viserys standing on the ground and the injured black dragon beside him. The ice blue flames in his eyes shook slightly, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Then the Night King ignored the fact that the army of whites under his command was now fiercely attacking Loras, and he controlled the ice dragon under him to fly to the north of Loras, to the dark and trembling sea in the distance. He's gone. Viserys stood on the ground, with the black dragon Balerion beside him, and the dragon lance of the gods in his hand was stuck in the gap of the stone beside him. He saw the Night King riding the ice dragon and turning away, and he couldn't help but take 2 steps forward, as if he was going to chase him. The main reason was that he had finally caught the other party's trail, and he didn't want to let him go. However, at this moment, he thought of the nightmare he had had, and the prophecy that Zuang brought to him. The young silver-haired dragon rider turned his head and took a look at the shocking scars on Balerion's hind legs, which were still bleeding, and immediately gave up the idea of taking this risk. If there were no such prophecies, he might dare to continue riding the dragon alone and chase the other party to the ends of the earth. However, with these prophecies, Viserys did not dare to risk Balerion's life. Let's do this for now. Next time, we must never let him go. Viserys watched the Night King riding the ice dragon gradually disappear in the distance, then untied the wrist guard on his armor and threw it on the ground. After flying for so long and fighting just now, Viserys also felt deeply tired. Chapter 861 Maze Builder. Shortly after the fall of Bravos, Loras was also attacked by the White Walkers, but compared with the heavy losses of Bravos, Loras was in a better situation. Viserys, the leader of the human coalition, rode a dragon to Loras in time, intercepted the Night King and his ice dragon from the air, and repelled him, successfully relieving the pressure on Loras's military and civilians, and the remaining fleet of Bravos also played a vital role in this. They kept going back and forth between Loras and the nearest land, transporting the refugees and soldiers on the Loras beach. Therefore, although Loras eventually faced the fierce attack of the army of the dead and eventually fell, fortunately, most of the Loras people survived this life and death battle and did not become a member of the army of the dead. They fled to the peninsula outside the Bay of Loras, and then some of them went straight to Andalus on the Upper Rhine River along the Valyrian Road, and some of them went through the Norvus Mountains to the inland city of Norvus, which they thought was safe. Norvus is surrounded by mountains on all sides. It is located in the center of the endless Norvus Mountains. Its geographical location is extremely important and it also has natural barriers to guard. Bravos and Lorath were attacked by the White Walkers one after another and then fell. Now these frightened Lorath people feel that the seaside is full of dangers. No one knows when the White Walkers will emerge from the bottom of the sea at night, and the ground is relatively safer. The Bravos people have the opposite view of the Lorath people, because in their eyes, the White Walkers all emerge from the ground, so now they are on the road of escape, fearing that the White Walkers will suddenly break out of the ground in front of them. Because of Balerion's injury, Viserys temporarily rested on Lorathan Island for a few days. During this period, the White Walkers discovered him, but did not command the army of whites to besiege the injured dragon and the most powerful dragon rider of mankind. Because they probably knew that it was useless to attack Viserys and the Black Dragon. Balerion's wings were not injured, and he was not unable to fly away. He was just resting here temporarily, because his hind legs were injured. The White Walkers watched from afar, and did not dare to approach, but the corpses still formed a huge circle to surround Viserys and the Black Dragon. I don't know what purpose it was for, just like watching. If it was someone else who had seen such a scene, they might have been scared silly. However, Viserys did not care about these corpses watching from afar, and did their own things. Anyway, they did not move at all, just watching silently. Even if Viserys leaned against the dragon and closed his eyes to rest temporarily, they did not move, as if they could not smell the breath of living people on Viserys and the black dragon. This tacit understanding lasted for a few days. While helping Balerion recover from his injuries, Viserys also wandered around the second largest island of Lorathan. This is a famous ancient monument. Although it is not listed as one of the 9 man-made wonders, it is because it is impossible to prove that this labyrinth on Lorathan Island and other lawless islands were built by humans. The labyrinth on Lorathan Island is the largest, covering 3/4 of the land. Legend has it that the people who built these ancient mysterious buildings were a distant ancient race. Judging from the corpses found in the labyrinth, their bones were huge, much taller than human bones. Therefore, some people speculated that these maze builders were the descendants of humans and giantesses, but there was no evidence. Later, these maze builders also perished. In the legend of the lawless people, the maze builders were destroyed by marine creatures, such as mermaids, seals, and walruses. As for whether the maze builders were related to the weavers, and whether they were destroyed by the deep divers, these are unknown. Therefore, Viserys took advantage of the time when Balerion was recuperating to wander around this famous ancient maze. This maze on the island of Lorathan was built entirely of carved boulders, and that's why it has survived countless years of ups and downs, and still stands tall. However, today, a part of it was smashed by Balerion from the sky, but the part destroyed by Balerion is not worth mentioning compared to the entire maze. In history, this maze has also been attacked once, when the great Mancharin led the Andal army to attack Norvus. Norvus asked the Valyrians for help, and the Andal army was annihilated. Then the Valyrian Dragon King continued to ride his dragon to the Lolth Islands, spraying dragon flames to turn Charon's fortress in the center of the maze on the island of Lorathan into scorched earth. Because of its long history, the maze may no longer look the same as it did back then. Viserys can still see traces of dragon flames burning on some stone carvings. However, although this maze is full of traps, it does not pose much of a hindrance to Viserys, who has a power similar to divine consciousness. After that, Viserys spent some time and went around to the center of the maze, the place where the great Mancharin had built a fortress. However, now there are only ruins left, and there is no trace of the fortress tunnel. However, not long after Viserys arrived here, he accidentally discovered a tunnel here. According to legend, the maze on Lorathan Island does have a 4-story underground structure, but not many people have seen it with their own eyes. As for what is underneath, even fewer people know it. Viserys has only heard that the maze on Lorathan Island has an underground structure, but he also doesn't know what is underneath. Since we are here, let's take a look. Viserys looked at the deep tunnel and raised his eyebrows slightly, and then thought so. Anyway, he was free, and he was confident in his own strength, so he lit a torch and walked towards the depths of the tunnel. The tunnels in the maze were very spacious. As the legend goes, this place was probably built by giants. Even Viserys looked empty when he stood in it. The top of the tunnel was even 3 or 4 meters high, which was enough for an adult male giant to walk upright. After Viserys reached the second underground floor, he saw giant humanoid skeletons scattered on the side of the tunnel, which confirmed this. Was there a lost civilization of giants here? For some reason, Viserys suddenly thought of the children of the forest and the wooden men of Ivervalon. The wooden man representative did say that they were distant relatives of the children of the forest in Westeros. Would this extinct giant civilization in front of him have any relationship with the giant race in Westeros? Viserys couldn't help thinking this as he looked at the large and small skeletons on the ground. Chapter 862 Underground Mural. Then Viserys did not stay at the second underground level of Lorathan Island, but continued to walk deep underground. The foundation of the ancient maze of Lorathan Island is also made of some black boulders, similar to the buildings built by the Dragon King of Valyria. Many ancient buildings in this world use this magical black stone. Dr. Corleone in the History of the Citadel believes that the base of the towering tower on the Old Town Battle Island is as complicated as a maze, and it is also built of black stone. It is very likely related to the maze builder of Lorathan Island. Of course, this is just speculation and there is no solid evidence. The academic atmosphere of the Citadel is relatively open. Everyone can put forward their own ideas, and even record how much shit they have pulled and how many steps they have walked in their lives in the book. Because the base of the towering tower is similar to the black stone building built by the Valyrians, in addition to the saying that it is related to the maze builder, some people claim that the Valyrians are the natives of the ancient river bay. They lived on this land earlier than the ancestors came to Westeros. Later, they predicted the danger, so they moved their entire family to the Valyrian Peninsula. The base of the towering tower is the trace left by the Valyrians. Academics have a lot of speculations about these ancient buildings, but few people have come out to see them in person, like Dr. Marwyn. Viserys was exploring the underground maze with a torch in his hand. The third underground floor of Rolathorn Island began to faintly show some discomfort to Viserys. This feeling. The silver-haired young man holding a torch frowned slightly, feeling as if there were a pair of eyes around him secretly spying on him, and at the same time, felt a little cold. You know, he hasn't felt this way for a long time. In addition to these uncomfortable feelings, the huge humanoid skeletons on the ground gradually increased. However, what made Viserys curious was that in addition to the obvious signs of being moved by people, most of the remaining skeletons were facing one direction, that is, deeper in the cave. Viserys also found some traces of explorers in these ancient bones. They were obviously different from the corpses left by the maze builders. Although they had also turned into bones, they could be seen to be of normal human size, and there were some weapons on them that did not belong to that era. They are later explorers. Why did they die here? Viserys crouched down with a torch in his hand and examined the remains of these humans. He could see that these people should be explorers of the underground maze, but Viserys did not see any traces of battle on them. However, these maze explorers of unknown era died peacefully deep underground. Viserys could not tell the cause of their death from their bones. He didn't know if it was because these people died here. As the second largest island in the city-state of Lawless, no one has come to explore the secrets here for so many years. There are even very few residents on Lawless, and now they are all dead. Keep looking inside. After checking their bones, the silver-haired young man held a torch and looked into the darkness in the distance. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he didn't know what kind of waves were rising in his heart. But these horrible scenes did not stop Viserys from continuing to explore. After all, there are indeed very few things in this world that can threaten him. Then Viserys stood up and continued to walk deep underground. There is a fourth floor in the underground maze of Rolathorn Island. When Viserys arrived here, he had already reached the bottom of the entire maze. The darkness here seemed to be even purer. The torch in Viserys' hand swayed slightly in the absence of wind. The light from the torch seemed to be absorbed by something and became much dimmer. It could only illuminate the area around Viserys, and the rest was completely immersed in the deep darkness. Viserys glanced at the torch in his hand, but he was not timid. If someone else was in such a place with corpses everywhere and a weird atmosphere, he might have been scared and fled, but Viserys was still very calm. He held the torch in his hand and walked towards the depths of the darkness little by little. In the underground world of Rolathorn Island, there were more bones on the fourth floor. They were densely piled together and covered the entire ground. They also faced one direction. It seemed that they were doing some kind of sacrifice or worship before they died, and then something suddenly happened, and then they died collectively without any resistance. But this is very different from the legend that people speculated that the mermen, seal people, walrus people, and even deep divers destroyed the maze builders. They died without any battle. Why? The bodies of these maze builders are similar to the bodies of human explorers on the third layer of the outside world. The bones are well preserved, and there are few traces of battle. If a battle really broke out, it is impossible for so many bodies to be still intact and gathered together. However, when Viserys held a torch and carefully examined it, he also had other unexpected gains that were different from the upper layers. He found that there were many simple murals on the walls on both sides of the fourth floor of the maze. The light of a torch has dimmed a lot now, shaking slightly, and it is not known whether it is because the oxygen in the underground world has become thinner, or for other reasons. Viserys illuminated the murals on the wall, and then saw a group of humanoid creatures carved on the wall, who were not sure whether they were wearing fur or had long hair. They stood on the ground and looked up at the sky. Then the second mural was a dark sky lit up, and meteorites streaked across the sky, dragging countless long tails and falling down, and the group of hairy humanoids below were frightened, and the mural showed their panic. The third mural depicted a scene of a violent explosion. One day many years ago, a meteorite rain fell from the sky, and one of them happened to hit the land of today's Rollison Island. The original area of Rollison Island may be much larger than it is now, because in the mural, the island was instantly reduced by more than half after the meteorite fell, and a large number of hairy creatures died. This is really a disaster from the sky. Viserys didn't know what to say when he saw this. For people in ancient times, the ability to withstand disasters was extremely poor. A cold winter or a drought could cause the extinction of the race. Then he looked at the fourth mural, and Viserys' eyes suddenly shrank after seeing the fourth mural. The fourth mural depicts a scene that happened many years after the meteorite fell on the island of Rollison. The hairy people who suffered a major blow seemed to have regained their spirits. In the mural, they built an altar on the fourth floor of an underground maze, and on the altar was a pure black object, which seemed to be a black stone. Viserys couldn't tell what it was. The hairy people were densely packed on all 4 floors of the underground maze, and they were bowing to the altar deep underground and the black stone on it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 863 Discovery of Blackstone. The maze builders suffered heavy losses from a meteorite fall, and then they thought it was a punishment from heaven, so they built an altar to pray. Viserys couldn't help but have such an association in his mind when he saw the last mural, because it was hard not to have such an association from the first mural to now. However, the content of the last mural was creepy. This was obviously very similar to the scene Viserys was experiencing now. He had just seen a scattered giant skeleton from the first floor, and then there were several more on the second floor. The third floor suddenly became much denser, and even human skeletons appeared. It can be seen that human explorers went down to the third floor at most. They knew that there was a fourth floor, but they died here before they could go down further. And now Viserys is at the bottom floor that countless expedition teams have never reached. According to the murals carved by these hairy giants, they built the altar here, and it is very likely that in a ceremony recorded in the murals, all the maze builders suddenly died and became the last song. Then Viserys held the torch and shone forward again, but the wall in front was empty, with no other murals. It seemed that this was indeed the last message these hairy giants left to the world. So, the altar is in front. Viserys held the torch and shook the other nearby walls. After finding that there were no other murals, he cast his eyes into the depth and darkness in the distance. According to the information provided by the last mural, the altar built by the maze builders was at the deepest part of the fourth layer. Viserys continued to walk to the deepest part of the underground maze, and the skeletons of the maze builders under his feet made a crackling sound. Because it had been unknown how many years, these bones had already been close to extinction. It was only because the temperature and humidity in the underground palace were relatively stable and there was no wind and sun that they could barely maintain their shape. However, they turned into powder immediately after a slight touch. Crackling, only Viserys' footsteps could be heard in the underground palace. He didn't know how many bones he had crushed along the way, and he was holding a torch and constantly illuminating the way ahead. We are here. After an unknown amount of time, Viserys paused and stood still. Because in front of him, there finally appeared an ancient altar made of finely carved boulders similar to the maze outside. This is the altar. Viserys stood there holding a half-burnt torch and looked at the altar. It must be said that compared to the magnificent maze above the ground, this altar seemed a little shabby and hasty. For the ancient civilized races, their knowledge was relatively scarce, and they attributed everything to supernatural forces. Therefore, the most civilized races at that time did was to build altars, offer blood sacrifices and even the lives of their tribesmen as sacrifices. It seems that the meteorite fell from the sky and frightened the maze builders, so they hurriedly built altars to offer sacrifices and blessings, praying that the disaster would pass. However, they did not expect that this sacrifice and blessing would directly lead to the demise of the entire race. But I don't know if it was Viserys' illusion. Because the light of the torch was getting smaller, it could only dispel the darkness around him. Therefore, Viserys could not see the whole altar. Except for the place where he could see clearly, the rest was shrouded in darkness. Then Viserys squatted down and observed carefully. He could see some complicated symbols on these finely carved boulders. The symbols of these maze builders were somewhat similar to ancient language, but not exactly the same. Is this disaster or disaster? Viserys carefully identified it for a long time, but could not recognize it. Although he learned the ancient language with the giants, he did not recognize the symbols in the ancient language, because even the giants themselves could not write it, but only speak it. However, judging from these simple ancient language symbols, these maze builders seemed to have an inexplicable connection with the giants in Westeros. The silver-haired young man held a torch and squatted in front of the altar, studying the ancient characters on it. The road he had just come from was still pure darkness, without a trace of light, and completely silent, as if there had never been a road. Viserys stroked the huge stone that built the altar with his palm, and his eyes swept through the darkness around him. Although he did not show it on his face, when he came near the altar, Viserys' vague discomfort became more intense. It really seemed as if someone was spying on him in secret, and he also felt colder. Then Viserys turned his head and looked at the top of the altar. Although the light of the torch could not see clearly, there seemed to be something on it. It should be the black thing that is not clear on the mural. Viserys' heart was slightly alert. Although he looked bold and fearless and broke into the 4th floor of the underground palace alone, he was actually more cautious than anyone else. If his guess was right, this black thing was likely the culprit that caused the destruction of the entire clan of maze builders. Viserys walked up the steps of the altar. There were 7 steps on the altar. As he climbed to the highest step, the light from the torch in his hand allowed him to see the black object at the core of the altar. Is this a black stone? When Viserys saw that the object that the maze builders built the altar to worship was just a black stone, his heart couldn't help but jump slightly. He didn't react at first, but he remembered it the next second. He had seen this thing. Viserys had been in the north of the Great Wall, in front of the bottomless pit suppressed by the old gods. He used the power of the old gods to go back in time, and saw that, after he left the Great Wall, this group of White Walkers killed the old gods, and then one of the White Walkers walked into the bottomless pit. After an unknown amount of time, the White Walker walked out of it with a piece of this black stone in his hand. This black stone is different from other black stones, such as the black stones used to build Dragonstone and repair the Great Wall. Its texture is a bit oily, and seems to absorb light, even human eyes. Viserys now held a torch in his hand, and shone it on the black stone, but there was no reflection at all, as if all the light had been absorbed by it. Chapter 864 Takeaway. This stone must be hiding a crucial secret. Viserys looked at the oily black stone the size of a human head in front of him, and his heart even beat a little faster. At the beginning, he saw a White Walker bring this stone out of the bottomless pit, and he thought that this stone must contain secrets, and perhaps it could solve the mystery of the whole world. However, the oily black stone disappeared without a trace after being taken to the land of eternal winter by the White Walker, and Viserys did not expect to encounter such a black stone here again. Viserys reached out to grab the oily black stone, wanting to pick it up and take a look, but when he just touched it, it was as if he was electrocuted, and his palm suddenly retracted because the black stone sent a bone-chilling cold, even making him retreat a little. But when Viserys reached out to pick up the stone again, the coldness seemed to disappear, like an illusion. This stone is not light, as big as a human head. If it is an ordinary person, it is very likely that he cannot hold it. It feels a little heavy in Viserys' hand, which is enough to show that it is not an ordinary stone. Its density is much higher than other stones, and it is not even certain whether it is a stone. However, other than that, Viserys did not see any other special features from this stone. Its surface is very smooth and delicate, as if it has been polished. Viserys looked at this oily black stone with a torch in his hand, but time is tight now. Viserys can't see anything unusual just by looking at it in his hand for a few times. He can only wait to find a quiet place to study it slowly after returning. Meteor. Alter. White Walker. Combining the information Viserys has learned so far, the White Walkers seem to have a great interest in this oily black stone. From the murals carved by the maze builders, it can be seen that a meteor shower fell many years ago. I wonder if these oily black stones fell from the sky at that time. Then Viserys looked around, but couldn't find anything that could wrap the oily black stone the size of a human head. Then he simply tore off a piece of his clothes, wrapped the oily black stone, and held it in his arms. After taking away the mysterious oily black stone, Viserys continued to walk around the 4th floor of the underground palace with a torch. After finding no other valuable clues, he began to climb up and leave the underground palace. It took some time to walk from top to bottom because he was observing along the way, but it was very smooth when walking from bottom to top. Viserys soon walked out of the entrance of the underground palace and saw the long night outside again. Balerion, who was recovering from his injuries, was still lying in the ruins of the maze, licking his gradually recovering wounds. The black dragon recovered very quickly, not only because the dragon's physique was stronger, but also because of the bond between him and Viserys due to the black fog. The god-given golden finger that Viserys possessed seemed to possess a magical power. All those who were endowed with this power because of Viserys would have a special bond with him. In short, they were comprehensively strengthened, had stronger physical fitness, faster reactions, and more focused mental strength, but they were subject to Viserys, and even what they were thinking in their brains would be known. Moreover, the transmission of this information was also one way, just like a pyramid, that could only go from bottom to top. These people would not know what Viserys was thinking. Viserys went out for half a day, and then came back with a heavy package in his hand. The black dragon that was recovering from the injury still licked its wound lazily at first, but then seemed to have noticed something. Hot white mist suddenly spurted out of Balerion's nostrils, and he raised his head slightly, staring at the package in Viserys' hand, and then let out a low roar. Hey, Balerion was warning Viserys that what he was holding was very dangerous, and Viserys received Balerion's warning through telepathy. Although he remained calm on the surface, he was slightly startled in his heart. Dragons are the most sensitive creatures to magic in the world. They will notice any slight movement. However, Balerion actually showed a look of being in a state of great enemy when facing the oily black stone in Viserys' hand, even more than when he first saw the three-eyed raven and the Night King. Is this a magic item? Viserys did not feel the slightest magical breath from the black stone when he held it in his hand just now, but Balerion did not think so. He saw a strong magical fluctuation from it and thought that this power was very evil and wanted to destroy it. Fire and cold are eternal enemies, and dragon flames can destroy it. Can this oily black stone be destroyed? I know. The silver-haired young man received the message from his partner through telepathy, and his mind raced, but then he nodded and said, but we still need to take it back and crack the mystery. Viserys wanted to take this evil black stone back, which caused Balerion's dissatisfaction. The black dragon leaned down slightly and looked at Viserys with a pair of scholar eyes. This was a rare resistance of Balerion to Viserys' order, but in the end it couldn't beat Viserys' insistence, and agreed to put this evil stone on its back, because it believed that its partner would not harm it. Then Viserys boarded the black dragon's back. Balerion had been recuperating on Lorazan Island for several days. Although his wounds had not healed yet, they had almost recovered. It climbed up from the ground, where it was lying with Viserys on its back, spread its huge wings, and let out a deafening roar, ready to spread its wings and fly away. In the distance, the White Walkers who had also been silently watching the Black Dragon and Viserys for a few days saw Viserys take away the oily black stone. The ice blue flames in their eyes fluctuated slightly, and they seemed to be ready to move, but they finally suppressed their impulse. He flew away. We missed this opportunity. In the vast tide of corpses, Benjen stamped his feet when he saw Viserys riding a dragon and flew away, with annoyance on his face. He had also been watching here for a few days. He had always wanted to rush over and reveal his identity to Viserys, but was stopped by his sister Lyanna. Because Lyanna thought that before they rushed over, they might be burned to death by the Black Dragon first, or be killed by other White Walkers who found something wrong, which was too dangerous. He took the black stone away, which is very important. I hope he can crack the secret. Then Lioness said with ice blue flames flashing in her eyes. They were not here to watch Viserys, but to get the Black Stone. But they didn't expect to be discovered and taken away by Rhaegar's brother, Viserys. He does look like Rhaegar. Chapter 865 Research. A few days after the fall of Loras, Viserys, who had disappeared for a while, finally returned to the eyes of the world riding a black dragon. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but then they found that Balerion was injured, and they couldn't help but lift up their hearts again. Because not long ago, the scene of the human dragon riders and the Night King fighting over Loras was seen by many people, and even saw two dragons fighting, and finally falling from the sky, their lives unknown. The survivors who escaped from Loras spread the news, and people prayed for Viserys, hoping that he could come back alive, otherwise there would be no hope for the human side. Although there are still 7 dragons on the Empire side, the dragon riders are all women and children. If they are expected to fight the Night King, they may not be able to win, even if 2 adult dragons siege. However, it was at this time when rumors were spreading that Viserys, who had disappeared for a while after the war, finally reappeared. He first flew to Norvus to arrange the defense of the human city. Regardless of whether it would work or not, Viserys asked them to aim at the sky with giant crossbows loaded with dragon crystal crossbows without stopping. Bravos and Loras are both precedents. 2 free trade cities have been destroyed. Each city represents the death of hundreds of thousands of lives. There is no room for carelessness. If a city is attacked, evacuate the people in the city as soon as possible and move them to the south. Otherwise, after the city falls, they will become the people of the Night King and bring obstacles to this dawn war. Understood? Viserys asked, and the bearded monks of Norvus nodded repeatedly. Your Majesty, there is one more thing. However, they then mentioned another thing. Hundreds of miles northwest of Norvus, there is a place called the entrance to the underworld, listed as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world by Longlegs Lomas. There seems to be some abnormal situation recently. The bearded monk told Viserys that the bottomless pit has begun to show abnormal signs recently, and mist is rising up like boiling. Really? There is such a thing. Now is really a troubled time. Viserys frowned slightly after hearing this. Recently, there have been too many natural and man-made disasters. It seems that the whole world has become abnormal in the long night. However, since there is a problem, Viserys dare not neglect it. He is now the busiest person in the world. Facing the attacks of the White Walkers, he wishes he could learn to make a shadow clone and leave one in each city. Then Viserys rode Balerion to the entrance to the underworld hundreds of leagues away from Norvus. And here, as the bearded monks said, white mist is emitting, just like a pot of boiling water. The cracks in each rock are slowly emitting. A single stone is nothing, but being in the center is like being in a fairyland, except for the pungent smell in the air. Because if you smell the white mist here carefully, you can smell the smell of sulfur and saltpeter, just like the smell of the dragon's nostrils when it breathes. However, the dragon is made of blood and fire. According to the geographical knowledge Viserys has learned, the deeper the crust goes, the hotter it is. Is there going to be a volcanic eruption here? Viserys was somewhat doubtful. After all, although he had learned geography in high school, there was no geography course in college. He was not a scientific researcher. Although he had not fully returned the knowledge he had learned to his high school geography teacher, it was not enough to accurately determine whether this place was about to erupt. Therefore, after Viserys took a circle in this entrance to the underworld, he quickly returned to Norvus and expressed his guess. However, although the bearded monks did not say it explicitly, they all showed unbelievable expressions. People in this world have also heard of volcanic eruptions, but they regard it more as a kind of divine punishment. For example, the doomsday scourge of Valyria is said to be the eruption of 14 fire peaks at the same time. The rising volcanic ash covered the sky and the sun, covering the entire peninsula. Overnight, the Valyrian free fortress disappeared, and even the Valyrian peninsula was torn apart. And they believe that the premise of volcanic eruption must be a volcano. As the name suggests, it must be a mountain to erupt. They never think that a volcano can erupt in a bottomless pit or the sea. You're right. However, Viserys couldn't explain to them the specific reasons for the formation of the volcano for a while, otherwise he would have to start from the structure of a planet. and he was not sure whether his judgment was correct, so he just said his guess, and it was up to these bearded monks to decide whether to believe it or not. It took Viserys more than half a month to arrange the things in Norvus. During this period, Viserys did not worry whether the Night King would take the opportunity to attack the slowly retreating coalition forces, because the commander of the coalition forces was Bessie, who was the first human to accept the Black Fog except for the cat named Balerion. And one of the 4 glass candles directly controlled by the Empire was in his hand, and he could contact him at any time if there was any danger. Viserys stayed in Norvus for a short period of half a month, and then set off to Pentus. As the front line, Norvus and Andalus are now facing the impact of the White Walkers, but Pentus is one of the most important cities for humans today, and it cannot be lost after the fall of Bravus. The Pentus city garrison, the 1st Legion of the Empire, and others are guarding the economic capital of the Empire. The Dothraki people in the multi-ethnic system of the Empire have also come here. Viserys came to Pentus and stayed for a while. He found Dr. Marwyn, the priestess Melisandre, the Red Monk Makoro and others who escaped from the catastrophe of Bravus. Viserys took out the oily black stone found in the underground palace of Lorazan Island and asked these top human magicians to try to crack the mystery. He had a hunch that this mysterious black stone was the answer to the ultimate secret of this world. Dr. Marwyn and others did not find too many clues at first, just like Viserys did when he first saw this stone. However, after a period of research, they suddenly found that their mental abilities had increased significantly. It stands to reason that this mental ability growth is a good thing for these wizards, but none of Dr. Marwyn and others felt happy, because when they looked at each other, they could vaguely see the ice blue flame burning in each other's eyes. Chapter 866 Magnetic Field. There is a big problem with this stone. Dr. Marwyn and others were frightened by this sudden change. Is the crazy conjecture of that Mr. in history true? The White Walkers really do not belong to this world, but are aliens? Because when Viserys handed the black stone to these top human magicians, he told them how he got the stone, and relayed the content on the mural. Dr. Marwyn inferred from this that the maze builders worshipped the meteorite that hit Rollason Island, which is the stone in front of them now. But they did not expect that staying with this black stone for a long time would have a subtle negative impact. Fortunately, this problem was discovered in time. At present, the flame is still very weak, as if it will be extinguished by a gust of wind. There is still room for recovery. As long as they leave the stone at a certain distance, the flame and the eyes will disappear. Otherwise the consequences will be disastrous. However, after such a thing happened, Dr. Marwyn and others seemed to have seen a ghost, and they dared not approach this terrifying black stone again. Because everyone knows that the ice blue flame in the eyes is the sign of the White Walker. No one wants to be a White Walker. After all, the White Walker does not even have the thinking of a normal person. It is just a tool controlled by people. It is not certain whether the White Walker exists as the original person or just a spiritual carrier. However, this is not the end. Accidents occurred frequently after that. A maid in the Renaissance Palace accidentally approached the room where the oily black stone was stored. Then she died silently outside the room. The body was parked for a long time and even stiffened before it was discovered. Someone died suddenly here. This is naturally a big deal. After this happened, no one dared to approach this black stone. It was stored in the deepest part of the cellar of the Renaissance Palace by Viserys, isolated from the world, and became a taboo. However, although this oily black stone is weird, the research on it cannot be stopped. Because of such an incident, coupled with Viserys' description of the scene at that time, it is easy to think that the White Walker's purpose at that time was to go to the underground palace to take away the black stone, but was afraid of alerting the snake, so he watched from a distance. However, it was unexpected that Viserys was the first to discover and take away the black stone. This black stone must be very important to the White Walkers. Then the bold doctor with a strong body like a bull spoke in a positive tone. It has a strong influence on the surrounding area. It can turn some humans into White Walkers. At this point, Dr. Marwyn's face became a little serious. If this matter can be confirmed, it will undoubtedly be a groundbreaking event. Humans have taken a big step forward in understanding the White Walkers, their old enemy, and are about to unveil their mysterious veil. Rather than saying that it is important to the White Walkers, it is better to say that it created the White Walkers. Dr. Marwin deduced that this stone has a special field ability that can affect creatures close to it. However, this ability is slow to take effect on people with high spiritual attributes or strong will. Viserys had been carrying it with him for a long time without any abnormality. It was only after Dr. Marwin, Melisandre and others studied it for a period of time that changes occurred. As for its impact on ordinary people, it was devastating. Ordinary people affected by it would die directly and silently, just like the explorers on the third floor of the underground palace. Field ability? Magnetic field. In Pentus, at a round table meeting in the Renaissance Palace, Viserys, Dr. Marwin, Melisandre, Makoro and others sat around a conference table to discuss this mysterious black stone. When Viserys heard Dr. Marwin's analysis, he couldn't help but say that the ability described by the other party was somewhat similar to the concept of magnetic field. Dr. Marwin was indeed worthy of being the only doctor of occultism in the Citadel, and was called Magician Marwin. Many conjectures were deduced only through some simple clues provided by Viserys. Mr. Qyburn, who was engaged in dark research in the underground of King's Landing, was Dr. Marwin's little fanboy. He respected Dr. Marwin very much, and believed that the remaining Meesters in the Citadel, except Dr. Marwin, were grey sheep. Magnetic field. When Dr. Marwin heard Viserys' words, he was slightly stunned, then thought for a while and said, "I have never heard of the magnetic field that your majesty mentioned, but if it is the effect between magnets, it can indeed be called a magnetic field. It is also invisible and intangible, but an invisible force is affecting us. You said that the White Walkers were created by it. The White Walkers are aliens, and do not belong to this world. However, at this time, the High Priestess of the Moon Singers, Lady Hylia, said with a thoughtful look on her face, then is the Long Night also brought by it? The White Walkers borrowed its power to create the Long Night. Although the White Walkers are fierce, I don't think they have the ability to change the world. The High Priestess of the Moon Singers is also a survivor of the Battle of Bravos. She organized the followers of the Moon Singers to evacuate the people, and then she herself fell into crisis. However, she is one of the top wizards of mankind after all, and now that magic is reviving at its peak, her own ability is also at its peak, so she managed to escape with a little trickery. The question raised by Hylia is indeed thought-provoking, because although the White Walkers are now the #1 enemy of mankind, they have not shown the ability to influence the celestial phenomena, so there are only two factors, coincidence and external force. Coincidence means that the rules of the world will experience a long night to reshuffle every thousands to 10,000 years, which is God's will and cannot be changed. With the help of external forces, if the guess is right, the stone in front of you may have fallen from the sky. Since it also came from the sky, is it related to the coming of the long night? Although this world has dragons and other strange things, the sky is still mysterious to many people. Dragons cannot fly too high, and Viserys does not know whether the sky outside this world is a vast universe or the kingdom of the gods. This Hylia's question made everyone present look at each other, and no one could give a definite answer. This is a good question, but more evidence is needed. Dr. Marwin was silent for a moment and spoke first, then he thought for a while and continued. In fact, I have seen such a stone before, but the strange thing is that the stone does not have such magical power. I have said it once before, that is the Seaston seat in the Iron Islands, which is carved from a whole piece of such black stone. Your Majesty once said that a piece of black stone was suppressed under the body of the old god. The Seaston seat was once the throne of the Grey King, and the Grey King is the drowned god. The Grey King is the drowned god, which is also what Viserys told them, because he saw the Grey King killing the sea dragon Naga and the god of storms through that pale head. This kind of black stone, is it related to the gods? Dr. Marwin temporarily put aside the question of the High Priestess of the Moon Singer, and then after a moment of silence, he threw out another thunderbolt. Chapter 867, Lifting the Veil. Is the black stone related to the gods? The idea proposed by Dr. Marwin was a bit scary, and everyone present looked at each other in bewilderment. Don't talk about the gods recklessly, Doctor. However, on the other side, the red-robed monk Makoro of the Red God cult spoke with a somewhat uneasy expression. Although the doctrine of the Red God cult is based on a dualistic worldview similar to Zoroastrianism, they believe that except for the true Lord R'lyeh and the God of Cold, the rest are false gods. But now that magic has revived, and the long night has come, the whole world has fallen into disaster, but it is also a prosperous era with 100 flowers blooming, and 100 schools of thought contending. Wizards, sorcerers, alchemists, moon singers, red-robed monks, dark warlocks, necromancers, cloud wizards, fire wizards, blood wizards, torturers, trial knights, poisoners, priestesses, night walkers, shapeshifters, and believers of the black goat, pale holy child and night lion, etc. These magic systems have gods of all sizes to help them, and Makoro now dares not denounce them as false gods. There are many gods in this world, and the drowned god and the old gods are both well-known gods with a long history of believers and inheritance. Viserys confirmed the existence of the drowned god and the old gods. They each have a black stone. Could it be that the black stone is really related to the gods? But the black stone is in the hands of the drowned god and there is no problem. The Red Witch Melisandre did not speak from beginning to end. She has always been cautious in her words and deeds, but at this time she raised her bare hand and touched her copper-colored hair. Her pair of charming red eyes swept across the people present, and then she spoke in a cold and serious voice. The Seaston seat has been passed down from the Grey King to the High King of the Iron Islands for countless generations. It is said that only pious male Ironborn are qualified to sit on the Seaston seat, not impious Ironborn or women. However, so many Iron Kings have sat on the Seaston seat, and so many people have approached it, including the Greyjoy family in modern times, but there has never been a problem. There is also a piece of black stone under the body of the old gods, and it also did not cause a disaster. What does this show? Melisandre asked. What does it show? The old woman named Hylia, the high priestess of the Moon Singer, was slightly stunned, and did not react. It is very likely that the gods knew the harm of the black stone long ago, and then suppressed them. The influence of this black stone is ineffective against gods. On the other side, Dr. Marwyn, who had been pondering for a long time, spoke up. That makes sense. Dr. Marwyn's words made sense and everyone present nodded in agreement. After all, humans still have awe for the gods. However, after thinking for a while, everyone's eyes turned to Viserys, who was sitting in the first seat and thinking. The influence of the black stone is ineffective on the gods. However, Viserys seemed to have put it back with a cloth bag that was torn off casually. The black stone will have an impact on everyone, including Dr. Marwyn, the most powerful person present, but Viserys took it around for more than half a month, and flew to Pentos, as if nothing had happened. What does this show? Don't get me wrong, I'm far from the level of the gods. Viserys, who was thinking, saw the eyes of everyone, and after a little thought, he was able to understand, and spread his hand slightly and spoke. Perhaps the black stone is ineffective against creatures with divine fire. Divine fire is the power of faith. Viserys can use divine fire to awaken all objects with divinity, such as the faceless goddess statue, the raven head, and everything that the gods have used. Viserys has the qualifications to use these artifacts, because he has divine fire. The divine fire burning in his spiritual realm also has a passive skill, which is to protect him from low-level mental attacks, curse erosion, mental clarity, etc. at all times. Dr. Marwyn deduced that this black stone has a very special magnetic field that can interfere with the mind of creatures, and after long-term contact, it will give the ability of the magnetic field to other creatures. This is similar to a magnet. When it is placed together with iron for a long time, the iron will be magnetized and have a certain magnetism. The black stone has a special magnetic field, and long-term contact will give other creatures magnetism. But if other creatures want to carry this magnetism, there is another prerequisite, that they have enough mental power. Therefore, ordinary people with insufficient mental power will die, because they cannot bear this magnetism. People who have mysterious powers such as Dr. Marwyn will be magnetized imperceptibly, but fortunately it was discovered in time. Viserys should also be magnetized, but his mental power is far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. After all, he once swallowed the remaining power of the old gods, and was considered half of the old gods in the north, mastering some of the abilities of the old gods. In addition, He ignited the divine fire in the spiritual realm by himself, and the divine fire helped him to be immune to the magnetic field of the black stone, so Viserys could play with this oily black stone at will. If I give you the divine fire, can you be immune to the influence of the black stone? Then Viserys asked. You can try, your majesty. Dr. Marwyn thought for a while and nodded, and Viserys nodded slightly after hearing his answer. In that case, there is one more thing. If this oily black stone is very important to the White Walkers, then do we have reason to suspect that every target of their attack is aimed at this black stone? Carefully recalling that the White Walkers first appeared from the north of the wall, they defeated the resistance of the human coalition and broke through Winterfell. After that, the White Walkers did not rush to continue south, but searched hard for something in the north. Moreover, the three-eyed crow Brynden Rivers once told Viserys that he and the Night King were in the same darkness, and the strongest tree roots would be deep in the dark underground, and the White Walkers would find it sooner or later. Viserys did not understand what Brynden Rivers meant by this sentence at the time, but now think about it, maybe because of this black stone, no matter where the old gods hide, the White Walkers will eventually find it. Also because the old gods hid this black stone in a relatively deep position and threw it into the depths of the bottomless pit, the Night King spent a lot of effort to find the location of this black stone and the old gods themselves, and finally found it. In the same war, the White Walkers suddenly rowed their boats to attack the Iron Islands, which made sense. At first, humans thought that the White Walkers were not reckless and began to learn military tactics. But now it seems that the surprise attack on the Iron Islands was just to get another black stone, which is the sea stone throne that symbolizes the king of the Iron Islands. Chapter 868 Bet. According to this logic, the subsequent attacks on Aben Island, the Dothraki holy city of Ves Dothraki and the Mother of God, and the surprise attacks on Bravos and Loreth may also have traces. The White Walkers may not attack humans for the sake of attacking humans, but are collecting this black stone. So, I just need to carry it with me? Viserys thought for a while and said. If I carry it with me, will the Night King target me? Your Majesty, it is too dangerous to carry it with you. No one knows if it has any other effects. And your Majesty cannot contact ordinary people, because it will bring danger to them. As soon as Viserys opened his mouth, Dr. Marwyn on the other side hurriedly objected. He could understand Viserys' thoughts. The Night King's whereabouts were strange and uncertain. He flew to the east and the west. It was for this reason that Viserys left his two wives, Rhaenys and Daenerys, at the wall, and the capital of the empire, King's Landing, was also guarded by 5 young dragons. Viserys' intention was to be foolproof. If the Night King suddenly attacked the wall and King's Landing, humans would not be completely helpless, and the dragons would protect his family. However, although Viserys' arrangement was foolproof, it greatly delayed the process of human resistance to the White Walkers. Imagine if 8 dragons participated in Loreth's air battle. The Night King might not have escaped so easily. But does Viserys dare to gamble? He dared not take his family as a bet. But now there is such an opportunity in front of Viserys. The goal of the White Walkers is to get more Blackstone, and Viserys brought Blackstone with him, so that the Night King's attention would be attracted to Viserys, and then ignore the attack on other human cities, and Viserys could also transfer the dragons from other places to a big siege, and kill the Night King directly on human land. However, although Dr. Marwyn understood Viserys' idea, he firmly opposed it, because he did not think it was a good idea. The Night King was not a fool. He had his own logic and thinking and would not watch himself fall into the pit. And Dr. Marwyn looked at the young man with silver gold hair sitting at the round table, and there was something he wanted to say, but didn't say it. That is, at present, their basis for the effect of the Blackstone is still speculation. Dr. Marwyn cannot confirm whether the Blackstone really has no effect on Viserys, or because the Emperor is too powerful, so this kind of subtle influence takes a long time. If Viserys is really accidentally hit thinking of this, looking at Viserys' cheek, Dr. Marwyn couldn't help but shudder slightly. Viserys is a guardian of all mankind today. If he is accidentally hit, his body and mind are controlled by the Blackstone and become a White Walker or the next Night King, then mankind is really hopeless and will be completely reshuffled in this long night until life begins a new cycle. Therefore, For this possibility of even 1 in 10,000, Dr. Marwin does not want Viserys to carry this dangerous thing with him for a long time. We know that the White Walkers have another characteristic, which is that they will not rush to advance to the south before roughly controlling a certain area. Then Dr. Marwin spoke up. The meaning of this sentence is actually very simple. That is, the White Walkers will not skip Bravos and suddenly attack Pentus, and will not suddenly attack Volantis or Dawn's Sunspear. Your Majesty, why don't you put this Blackstone in Dawn? Dr. Marwin wanted to express very clearly. Viserys heard his words and tapped the table with his fingers. He thought for a moment, then shook his head and did not accept his suggestion. No, this Blackstone will be useless. Dr. Marwin believed that placing the Blackstone in Dawn or Volantis would be foolproof, and the White Walkers would not cross a large area of unconquered northern land to suddenly attack Dawn in the far south. However, Viserys and Dr. Marwin had different ideas. In addition to some principled issues, his thinking was relatively radical. Viserys believed that, since he had obtained this Blackstone, he could not let it be useless. It would be a waste, just to prevent the White Walkers from getting it. He wanted to make the Blackstone play the biggest role in his hands, such as luring out the Night King, or focusing his attention on him, so as to prevent him from attacking other human cities. Viserys' risky decision made Dr. Marwin open his mouth, and was about to say something, but Viserys waved his hand to stop him. My mind is made up, drive. Viserys' mind would never change, and Dr. Marwin saw his attitude, and knew that he would not be persuaded by a few words, so he could only nod slightly and speak, and then remain silent. Yes, Your Majesty. The discovery of the Blackstone made humans have a deeper understanding of the enemy, the White Walkers. The image of the White Walkers used to be mysterious, terrifying, and confusing, but now after a long period of contact, the secrets of the White Walkers have gradually been exposed, and the mysterious veil has been lifted bit by bit. The day of the decisive battle is approaching. Viserys stood on the top floor of the tower, and looked down at the city with lights, and murmured softly. The long night began at the turn of the century in the year 300 of the Egan calendar, and has lasted for more than a year. The human condition has become precarious. The White Walkers only need to drag it out to collapse the human coalition. However, the White Walkers do not seem to want to continue to drag it out due to some unknown restrictions. Therefore, the war situation seems to have stepped on the acceleration, and the battle has suddenly become fierce. From the victory of Narsinjal to the Battle of Bravos and Lorith, each battle has hundreds of thousands of inputs and casualties. These epic battles were unimaginable in Westeros in the past, but now it is a full-scale war between humans and White Walkers. Viserys has a hunch that the final decisive battle may be about to begin, and even the location of the decisive battle has been set. Others may not be able to perceive the changes in the entire battle situation, but from the perspective of the chess player, Viserys and the Night King are the ones who decide the direction of the war. And now the two seem to have chosen the location of the decisive battle in the vast land between Norvus and Koha. The coalition forces were still retreating from the Dothraki Sea, and now they had returned to the coalition base camp of Koha, back to where the dream began. At the same time, according to the intelligence received, the army of the dead that attacked Bravos and Lorith not long ago was now moving towards Norvus. However, Viserys did not rush to Koha with the Blackstone, but flew to King's Landing to increase the stakes for this decisive battle. Chapter 869, Disappearing Life. Your Majesty, what happened in the Riverlands? During the long night, King's Landing was also shrouded in darkness. As the third prime minister after the founding of the empire, the Lamate royal family patriarch leaned on a cane in the study of Meagher's Holdfast to report the riots from the Riverlands to the regent queen of the empire. Maya, a female knight in white armor, was protecting the safety of Her Majesty the Queen as the king's good. She pressed the hilt of the sword at her waist with one hand. This was a rare Valyrian steel sword in the world. Her face was meticulous, and she fulfilled her duties with all her heart. Now there was a riot in the Riverlands. The riot had been going on for some time. The reason was naturally that there was not enough food. The people were extremely hungry, and would besiege the castle. The governor of the Riverlands was the Bracken family of the twins. The old Earl of Bracken was also the adoptive father of Viserys, the minister of the navy of the empire. He wanted to ask King's Landing for help, hoping to get some food aid, but failed. Irian refused the old Bracken's request for help. Willis Tyrrell reported the matter to her at that time. However, Irian told him that the safety of King's Landing was the priority. No matter what, she didn't care about anything else to ensure that there would be no riots in the capital of the empire. Therefore, the Riverlands, which did not receive food aid, soon broke out in civil strife. After all, people can do anything when they are hungry, and there is no room for compromise in the matter of survival. Civil strife broke out in the Riverlands. Henry Bracken, the heir of the Bracken family and the twins, who was far away at the wall and was the illegitimate son of the old Bracken, received the message. He asked the two queens of the wall, Rhaenys and Daenerys, hoping to return to his hometown to quell the rebellion. Henry Bracken's request was granted, so he led some soldiers to return to the Riverlands to quell the rebellion. Unfortunately, before Henry's army could get back to the twins, bad news came. The old general who had made great contributions to the establishment of the empire, former Dragonstone Fleet Commander-in-Chief Geoffrey Bracken, breathed his last in the twins. Of course, the old man was not killed by the rebels on the battlefield, and his death had little to do with the rebellion that broke out in the Riverlands. It was purely because he was too old, and with the large and small hidden injuries left on his body when he was young, it was considered a happy funeral to live to such an old age. He had enjoyed enough wealth and glory in his later years. Unfortunately, Henry did not catch up to see his father off for the last time, and the person the old man kept talking about while lying on the bed in his dying moments did not say goodbye to him either. Viserys was even fighting against the White Walkers thousands of miles away. If it were in peacetime, the death of Geoffrey Bracken, the governor of the Riverlands, would definitely be a major event that would shake the imperial political arena, because everyone knows how much this old man means to His Majesty the Emperor, not just a father, but more than a father. However, now is a special period, so the news was quickly suppressed after it was passed to King's Landing. Irian was a little flustered after hearing the news. She didn't know if it was because she refused to help the Riverlands that the old man died. If Viserys knew about this, would he be angry? But in fact, Irian didn't mean any harm, but in this special situation, food is an asset more valuable than gold, and every grain of food is crucial. If we are not hypocritical, the imperial family, as the regent Queen Irian herself, Princess Diana, Prince Heroes, etc., must have enough food to eat, and even the standard of 3 meals a day remains unchanged. But for the people of King's Landing, it has been reduced to 1 meal a day, and the amount each person can get is extremely limited. The issue of food is of vital importance, so it is understandable that Irian is unwilling to give out food for disaster relief. Even her father, Prince Doran, wrote a letter for help, wanting his daughter to allocate some food to aid Dawn, but was also rejected. Irian wants to protect the empire left to her by Viserys, but the reality is that this is not an easy stall to clean up. No country or city-state will be at peace under the long night. The news of the death of Old Bracken was suppressed when it reached King's Landing. Only a few people such as the Prime Minister Willis Tyrrell knew about it. The body of Old Bracken would definitely not be transported to King's Landing for a state funeral, but buried on the spot. However, Willis then told Irian 2 pieces of bad news in succession. The first was that William Derry, the former headmaster of the Red Keep, who was also of great significance to His Majesty the Emperor, and had saved his life, had passed away. He died in the Riverlands like Old Bracken, but the difference was that Old Bracken took his last breath in the twins, while William Derry asked to leave King's Landing after the establishment of the Empire, and returned to his hometown, Derry City in the Riverlands. This is located at the intersection of the King's Road and the Trident in the town of Earl Harroway. It is an ancient and small castle only half a day's ride from the south bank of the Trident. It is the hometown of the former master of the Red Keep. William Derry became a grey-haired half-blind old man in his later years. He was much younger than the old Bracken, but he also lived many more years because of the change of fate. He knew that he was no longer useful to Viserys, but he didn't want to be a useless person, which made him have no self-esteem, so he wanted to return to his hometown to spend his old age. William Derry has returned to his hometown Derry for several years. Here are his sister Mariah Derry, the wife of Mary Free, and another sister Jean Derry. Jean married Cleus Free, and was also the daughter-in-law of the Free family. His two sisters married the Free family, but unfortunately the Free family has disappeared from history, and William Derry's two sisters also returned to Derry. The Earl of Derry is William Derry's younger brother, Earl Raymond Derry. He also has a 10-year-old son, Lyndon Derry. The former Redcastle coach was supposed to be enjoying his old age, but he appeared unexpectedly at this time. The villages in the Derry family's territory also broke out in riots due to hunger. Earl Raymond, who went to solve the problem, only brought a few cavalrymen with him. Then the problem was not solved, and a conflict broke out. Earl Raymond was caught off guard and killed by a sneak attack. The mob shouted to break through Derry, took out the food of the nobles to eat their fill, and then launched an attack on Derry. However, although Derry was a castle, it was too small to support the siege of the hungry mob, and eventually fell. Sir William Derry died in this riot. His two sisters were also abused, and the heir of Derry, Lyndon Derry, who was only 10 years old, was also killed. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 870 Brother. The fall of Derry was actually just a microcosm of the riots in the Riverlands, but unfortunately, a crucial person died in this riot. Former Dragonstone Lord Commander Geoffrey Bracken passed away, and former Red Keep Master Willem Derry also passed away. Irian suddenly felt that the meaning of the long night to people was not only eternal darkness, but also the disappearance of familiar faces. Willis Tyrrell's grandmother, Lady Elena Redwine, known as the Queen of Thorns, also passed away in the long night. The old woman certainly did not starve to death. Although the Tyrrell family declined, it was once the Lord of the Riverlands. However, the fatal harm brought to people by the long night was not just hunger. There was also cold. The sun did not cover the earth for a year, and the temperature of the whole world had already fallen into the glacier. The air people exhaled into their lungs was like a knife. If you don't experience this feeling yourself, you can't understand it at all. How can people fight against the cold? Even the sharpest sword can't cut through the cold. Therefore, the coming of this long night is a torment for young people, but it is the sound of death for the elderly. A heavy snow fell on the plains of the Reach, which was rare. Starspit City is located in the borderland, and is close to dawn. It has been invaded by wars. However, the weather here is hot all year round. When have you ever seen heavy snow flying all over the sky and the whole world covered in silver? Lady Elena Redwine was bedridden when the heavy snow fell. In the small and simple house in Starspit City, the old woman looked at the falling snowflakes outside the window on the bed. A brazier was lit in the room. Although the temperature in the room here was not much lower than that in Highgarden, she still talked about the warm and comfortable room in Highgarden, the garden with spring all year round, and Willis and her favorite Marguerite. Unfortunately, these two people are not by her side now, and they are both in the distant King's Landing. The old woman, known as the Queen of Thorns, has been covered with thorns all her life. Ever since her husband, Lord Ross Tyrrell, was carried back on the door panel with his horse, she has been using the thorns to protect herself and her children. She actually doesn't like her son Mace, always criticizing him for being as weak and bullied as his father Ross Tyrrell, but she still shed tears when she heard the news of the death of Mace and her grandson, the father and son. Then she placed all her hopes on her grandson Willis and granddaughter Marguerite, hoping that they could revive the Tyrrell family. Fortunately, Willis and Marguerite were very competitive, and did not disappoint Lady Elena's expectations. They took on the mission of reviving the Rose family, but unfortunately, they did not have time to come back to say goodbye before Lady Elena died. After a heavy snowfall, Lady Elena also left the world. The long night reshuffled all the forces in the world, and the old people all things went away, and new life flourished. After reporting the riots in the Riverlands to Irian, Willis bowed respectfully and left on crutches. He wiped the tears from his eyes with his sleeves when he walked out of the door, because he had just received the news that his grandmother was critically ill, and then the bad news came. His sister Marguerite did not have time to return to Star Shuttle City to see her grandmother for the last time, and he was not prepared to return to Star Shuttle City because he was now the Prime Minister of the Empire, the Hand of the Emperor. He accepted the appointment at the beginning of the long night and served as the acting prime minister until Mr. died of illness. Willis felt that he was not only shouldering the mission of reviving the family, but also the expectations of the entire country, especially in this critical moment. My lord. Willis walked through the silent throne room with a cane in his hand. A maid hurried up to help him leave, but Willis waved his hand to refuse the other's kindness. He stood there and turned his head to look back at the cold throne in the dark, then sighed and turned away. In the garden of the Red Castle, the little Princess Diana of the Empire and her brother Hellas were playing. Diana was enthusiastically playing with swords and guns, while the dark-haired boy was sitting on the swing beside him in a daze. We have a little brother, did you know? Hellas, the silver-haired little princess, who had just finished practicing swordsmanship with a wooden sword, took a few deep breaths, wiped the fine and then sweat on her forehead and spoke. Brother? Hellas, who was sitting on the swing in a daze, was stunned for a moment, and then he reacted. The boy had delicate cheeks, dark hair, and dark eyes. He looked very similar to Viserys, and you could tell at a glance that he was his son. But unfortunately, he did not inherit too many characteristics of his paternal Targaryen family. Instead, the characteristics of the Martell family, the Rhoynar, and the Dornish Salt people prevailed. Of course, this is just a matter of probability, because the boy's mother has half Dornish blood, and Rhaenys herself has many Martell family characteristics, long brown hair, and dark eyes. Heroes is a little taciturn. He likes to immerse himself in his own world. He has no friends except his sister. Heroes is also not good at hiding his emotions. Therefore, the 5-year-old boy's face clearly showed some surprise and disbelief when he heard the news. Yes, this is what I overheard today. Mother received a letter from the wall, and the elder sister Diana, who has short silver gold hair and looks heroic with a wooden sword in hand, did not notice her brother's complicated emotions. Although Diana is a few years older than Heroes, her mind is not as delicate as her brother, and she is even a little nervous. She put the wooden sword back on the weapon rack, then thought about it, and continued to speak. Our brother's name seems to be Aemon Targaryen, the same name as the ancestor on the Great Wall. I heard from my mother that the ancestor died in an accident, so he was named Aemon in his memory. By the way, the one who gave birth to Aemon is our aunt, the Prince of Dragonstone. Daenerys. Diana did not notice the complex and gloomy expression on Heroes' face. At this moment, a low and loud dragon roar suddenly came from the dark sky of King's Landing. Then a huge black dragon swooped down from the dark clouds, and in the Red Castle, Diana raised her head and said excitedly while saying something. It's father. Father is back. Father? When Heroes heard his sister's words, he slightly restrained the expression on his face, and then he also stood up and looked up at the sky. Chapter 871 The Boy's Change. Father. The little girl with silver gold neck-length hair ran over to give Viserys a big hug when she saw him. Viserys also picked up his eldest daughter and spun her around in the sky until she giggled and then put her down. The little boy with brown hair stood aside and watched silently. He looked at his father and sister's almost identical hair color and glanced at the long curly brown hair in front of his forehead. His expression slightly dimmed. Although Heroes was still young, as a prince of the Targaryen family and the eldest son of the Emperor of the Empire, he was naturally not a child from an ordinary farmer's family. He had to receive the excellent education of the royal family at a very young age and understand the meaning and struggle of power. Then, when Viserys put his sister down and turned his eyes to himself, Heroes straightened his clothes and walked up, bowed his head slightly, saluted seriously and said, "Father." Viserys looked at his eldest son, a boy with a face very similar to his own, but without inherited blood characteristics. He saw Heroes, as if he saw himself back then. The smile on Viserys' face just faded a little. Heroes saw his father's smile fade, and his heart tightened slightly. In fact, every child of this age would be frightened, and his heart would skip a beat when he saw his father's smile disappear, wondering if he had done something wrong. What did I do wrong? However, before Heroes could react, he saw his father's face smiling again. Viserys reached out and rubbed Heroes' little head affectionately and then held him in his arms. "Well, my little Sunday. The name Viserys gave Heroes means sun god, because he had high expectations for his eldest son, hoping that he could become the hope and strength of many people. The sun brings hope to people, and perhaps there is no moment more deeply experienced than now. Therefore, from this name, it can be seen that Viserys has high hopes for Heroes and wants his eldest son to be his heir. However, after not seeing each other for more than half a year, Heroes' changes surprised Viserys a little bit, because before he left, Heroes was a boy who loved reading but was taciturn, but just now he saw a boy who was skilled in greeting, seemingly intimate but actually kept a distance, and moved the monarch-subject relationship into the family. Viserys was surprised at the changes in Heroes in just half a year, but then he thought that Heroes was only 5 or 6 years old now, and it was the stage of shaping his worldview. He might have been influenced by some people around him, and then his smile was slightly restrained. But he didn't expect Heroes to be so sharp at such a young age. Just by restraining his smile, the boy noticed it, and felt a little nervous. But Viserys reacted quickly. He rubbed the boy's hair to relieve Heroes from the tension just now, and he breathed a sigh of relief. After not seeing each other for more than half a year, even the relationship between father and son would be unfamiliar. Heroes was a little nervous when he saw his father again. "What about me?" The silver-haired girl on the side pouted her lips when she heard her father call her brother little son and spoke in dissatisfaction. Then when she heard Viserys call her little moon in the same way, she smiled again and kissed her father's slightly stubbled cheek. It is a blessing to have both sons and daughters, and Viserys is also very fortunate to have such two cute elves. However, when Viserys met Irian and learned about the series of recent events, his good mood just disappeared. "My love." Irian looked guilty. She felt that she had failed Viserys' trust. Her husband handed over the entire country to her. Irian was full of confidence at first, thinking that governing the country and the intrigues of men were nothing more than that. However, when Viserys really handed over the entire country to her, Irian found that reality and imagination were completely different things. Irian is somewhat similar to the former Queen Cersei Lannister of King Robert in character. Cersei is proud, willful, ambitious, and thinks she has great political talent. She believes that she cannot fully exert her abilities due to her gender. Cersei admires and imitates her father Tywin's way of doing things, but in fact, Cersei does not have the scheming of Duke Tywin. She only has self-righteous little tricks. She is more than vicious in small matters, but lacks both viciousness and wisdom in dealing with big things. Irian may not be as capable as Cersei, because although Irian is also decisive, she is not as vicious as Cersei. As for governing the country, Irian is still a little better than Cersei. Because Irian at least will not be full of confidence in the field she is not familiar with, she will also patiently listen to the opinions of others, even if they are people she doesn't like, as a dwarf little devil Tyrion Lannister, and Willis Tyrell of the Rose family. Viserys' influence on her made her realize that even a man as outstanding as her husband would patiently consult experts in this area when faced with something he didn't understand. Viserys once took Irian to inspect the farmland around King's Landing. Her husband personally went to the fields to visit, so Irian naturally couldn't continue to sit in the carriage. Then she saw Viserys carefully asking a white-haired farmer about how to grow wheat better, and the other party also answered with fear and trepidation. This scene was very impressive to Irian, a princess of Dawn who had lived in a water garden since childhood, and enjoyed wealth and glory. Old Lord Bracken and Sir William Derry. Irian was a little uneasy. She saw the sadness and anger on her husband's face. "It's none of your business." After a long silence, Viserys finally spoke slowly, putting herself in her shoes. Irian's choice was not wrong. As the ruler of the empire, she must give priority to the safety of the capital. The importance of the capital is self-evident. After all, this is the land under their feet. Chaos in other places can be suppressed, but chaos in the capital often means that a country's ruling power is declining, and it is not far from destruction. The death of the old Earl of Bracken was because he was too old and could not withstand the torture of the cold night and fell down and died. The death of Sir William Derry made Viserys particularly angry. Chapter 870 to taking the dragon away. The former Red Keep coach saved Viserys' life, and he himself had no desires, which made Viserys feel guilty and didn't know how to repay him. After the establishment of the empire, Viserys wanted to give him a castle, but was rejected by Sir William. He wanted to leave King's Landing and return to his hometown. Viserys then proposed to appoint him as the Earl of Derry City, but was also rejected by the other party. Now the Earl of Derry City is his younger brother, and the heir is his little nephew Linman. He doesn't want to compete with his younger brother and nephew, not to mention that his physical condition is not good. One eye is blind, and he has long been unwilling to fight for power. He just wants to return to his hometown to spend his old age. Sir William has made up his mind, and Viserys can no longer keep him. After all, the brothers John Derry and William Derry have given everything for the Targaryen family. Then he let Sir William get on the carriage and leave King's Landing and return to his hometown. But Viserys didn't expect that this time it would be a farewell forever. Sir William was killed by the mob, Derry fell, and the Derry family disappeared from history. Viserys was naturally angry. He resisted the terrible idea of sending a dragon to burn Derry and the mobs that occupied Derry. He wanted to burn these people alive, but he didn't want Derry to be wiped off the horizon. Although these mobs were hungry people, they could be forgiven rationally, but emotionally Viserys just wanted them all to die. Send a raven to the twins. Tell Humphrey to send troops to quell the rebellion as soon as the funeral of old Lord Bracken is arranged. I want to see their heads. Do this, Willis. Viserys' voice sounded calm, but in fact it concealed a fierce murderous intent. Willis Tyrrell, who came to the audience with a cane, was slightly stern after hearing this, and then hurriedly nodded in agreement. Yes, your majesty. I will never disappoint your majesty. Although Willis did not support Viserys' killing, he knew rationally that, if Viserys really wanted to kill, he would not be able to persuade him. Then Willis left here again with a cane. My love, how is the war over there? Will the long night end? Is it really the end of the world? After Willis left, Irian asked all the questions she wanted to ask. After all, King's Landing, as the capital of the empire, is too far away from the front battlefield. Whether it is the wall or the battlefield in the East Continent, the transmission of information is slow. She doesn't know how far the war has developed now. She hopes to hear Viserys' promise in person. And this is what Viserys wants to say next. The purpose of this sudden trip back to King's Landing. Although it only takes a few days to fly from Pentos across the narrow sea to King's Landing. Now that the decisive battle is imminent, every minute and every second is especially cherished. The Night King rode the injured ice dragon to the land of eternal winter to heal his wounds. No one knows when he will return. However, Viserys also took the time to fly back to King's Landing under such circumstances, because he had to come back for this matter. The war is about to come to an end, and I don't know whether the long night will end. Viserys said frankly that he couldn't predict what would happen in the future. If the long night didn't end after killing the Night King, there was no way, and he could only find other reasons. Or simply store up food and hide in a safe and warm place to survive. The purpose of my return this time is for this decisive battle. Viserys once again spoke frankly. He returned to King's Landing to mobilize more dragons to participate in this war. The 5 dragons in King's Landing have grown up and have the ability to fight. They have rested in King's Landing for too long, since the long night came. Although their stay in King's Landing is of great significance in order to protect the capital of the Empire and Viserys' family. But for the upcoming decisive battle, this is undoubtedly a huge waste. Humans urgently need more dragons to fill in and join the war. This time, Viserys will take away the 5 dragons in King's Landing, Vhagar, Tyrex, Meryx, and the little lady Syrinx in the silver. Take all the dragons? Irian was slightly stunned when she heard her husband's words, and then the glittering golden earrings shook, and her beautiful cheeks were full of worries. What about King's Landing? My love, me and the children. Viserys originally decided to let Rhaenys and Daenerys guard the Great Wall. Leaving 5 dragons in King's Landing was a foolproof plan to prevent fires in the rear and sneak attacks. But now Viserys decided to take all the dragons away. You and the children come with me. Viserys hesitated for a moment and said, in fact, this was one of the plans he had considered before. The best way is to take his wife and children with him. Although all the royal members of the Empire leaving King's Landing will inevitably have a negative impact and even cause turmoil, Viserys can't care about that at the moment. The candlelight flickered gently in the bedroom. Viserys and Arion were talking by candlelight, while their children Diana and Heroes were resting in their respective rooms. What about the Iron Throne, after we leave King's Landing? Hearing her husband's thoughts, Arion frowned slightly, and then spoke worriedly. The departure of all the royal family members from King's Landing will inevitably cause rumors to spread, especially at this turbulent time. The entire emerging empire seems to be still stable, but in fact it has been bitten in all aspects by the invasion of the Long Night. The emperor's decrees cannot leave King's Landing. The local military system began to be in chaos. Some people had their own troops and some hoarded food. The centralized system of the empire was subjected to the most severe test just a few years after its birth. This is a test of life and death. After all, the people are hungry and can't see hope, which will naturally cause chaos. No one will continue to be loyal to the so-called king, and nobles on an empty stomach. Now the empire is overdrawing its strong prestige built by sweeping across the 7 kingdoms in the past few years. On the surface, it still looks strong, but in fact, the building is almost crumbling. You take the children away, my love. I will stay in King's Landing and protect this family business for you. Then Arion thought for a moment, her eyes slightly red, and finally made a difficult decision. Arion Viserys heard his wife's words and his eyes narrowed. If all the dragons leave King's Landing, they will lose the greatest guarantee. It is the largest city of humans, and also the most dangerous place. After all, there are so many mouths to feed. When the dragons are there, they can suppress the danger, but if the dragons leave, can Arion still suppress these people? I believe Ser Maya will protect me, my love, no matter what danger there is. However, Arion did not wait for Viserys to finish his words, and blocked his mouth with her soft lips. She kissed her husband deeply, and after a long while, she raised her head and spoke seriously. Your more than 10 years of hard work cannot be destroyed like this. Chapter 873 Return. Arion wanted to stay in King's Landing to protect the country that her husband had built, and Viserys was silent and speechless. It was a good thing for him that Arion was willing to stay in King's Landing, but the corresponding price was that the defense of the imperial capital was weakened, and Arion would be in danger if she stayed in King's Landing. But she was willing to do so, and let Viserys take the 2 children away, because she understood that it might be dangerous to stay in King's Landing, but eggs should not be put in the same basket. She didn't want the children to fall into danger with her. I'll leave Syrinx to you, Viserys said after a moment of silence. The little lady was the 4th lady of the 5 young dragons. She had a gentle personality. Arion did not have the blood of a real dragon, and could not control the dragon. The other dragons might not be willing to obey her command, but the little lady had a good personality, and Viserys could let her listen to Arion's orders temporarily. With Syrinx, if King's Landing was really in danger, she could at least take Arion away from here. Okay. Her husband told Arion to do this without any pretense, and nodded decisively. With a giant dragon, Arion can have more courage and confidence to continue to stay in King's Landing. She has also heard about the war situation in the eastern continent. Bravos and Lorath have fallen one after another, and large human cities are the main attack direction of the White Walkers. Viserys came back this time to call people and bring more dragons back to fight. After this was done, he stayed in King's Landing for a few days before setting off to leave. He left the little lady Syrinx to Arion and told her to listen to Arion. The gentle little female dragon did not agree at first, but later agreed happily after receiving several roasted whole cows. After all, their 5 brothers and sisters were hatched by Viserys. However, because the little lady and Arion are not partners and have no telepathy with each other, Arion also opened up an open space in the Red Castle for Syrinx to rest. In addition to foraging and playing, Syrinx lives in the Red Keep most of the time, which can also effectively deter some rebels. After Viserys arranged Syrinx's affairs, he told Maya, a female knight of his king's good, some things. Maya once shared hardships with Viserys, who was alias to Zeman, in the ruins of Illyria. Viserys saved Maya's life with the Black Mist, and Maya also found 5 dragon eggs that survived the doomsday disaster for Viserys in the ruins. These 5 dragon eggs were later hatched into Vagar, Tyrex, Meryx, Syrinx, etc. Because these dragons live in the royal forest on the edge of King's Landing, they can often be seen by the public, and they also gave these 5 dragons some nicknames. For example, the most ferocious Sister Vaga is called the Red Queen by the people. She is Princess Diana's partner and has a hot temper. Prince Heroes' partner is the second oldest, Terex. Because of his golden appearance, handsome and domineering, he is very popular among the people. There are at least more people who like Terex than those who like Vaga. The golden dragon is called the Overlord. Merex has dark blue scales, narrow bones and graceful curves of female dragons. In addition, she often appears in the seawater of Blackwater Bay. Her low-key personality never disturbs human life. She is called Siren Merex by sailors. As for the subsequent little lady Syrinx, she is the most popular dragon. She has the most perfect appearance, translucent dragon horns and wing bones like crystal, etc. People like this beautiful little female dragon very much. The last silver nugget is not as famous as his brothers and sisters. Because of congenital deficiencies, he experienced some hardships when he was born and almost didn't break out of the shell. Later, he was captured by the Faceless Man once because of his weak body. Therefore, Silver Nugget is called a premature baby. Viserys took the other 4 dragons away, leaving Syrinx behind. He gave Maya some instructions, telling her that if there was any danger in King's Landing, she must protect Arion at all costs. Yes, Your Majesty. The red-haired female knight looked at Viserys with her helmet in her arms, and for some reason she suddenly thought of the first time they met, when his name was still Aemon. As a female mercenary who licked blood on the tip of the knife of the Volantis, she never expected a series of events that would happen later, and her fate would also change dramatically, from a female mercenary to a member of the world-renowned knights. We are friends, aren't we, Aemon? Of course I will protect your wife. Then the female knight suddenly smiled and said, and Viserys was stunned for a moment, and then couldn't help but smile. Yes, the two of them are friends. Back in Volantis, Maya once patted Viserys on the shoulder and told him to follow her in the future, but time passed in a flash. Then Viserys summoned the Unsullied Blackworm, the leader of the Royal Guard, and Brynden Tully, the commander-in-chief of the city garrison, and other generals of King's Landing. If King's Landing encountered danger, it would retreat to Highgarden. When Viserys arranged everything, it was time to leave. When I come back next time, it may be dawn. On a gravel beach outside King's Landing, there was a thin layer of snow on the ground. The black dragon Balerion was lying beside everyone and taking a nap, emitting heat. The other 5 dragons Vaga, Tyrex, Merexes, Syrinx and others were watching. Irion led the people of the Red Castle to say goodbye to her husband and 2 children. Viserys looked at the still dark sky above her head and then said jokingly, "That would certainly be the best thing." Irion smiled when she heard what Viserys said. The end of the long night meant that her husband had won the battle. "I'm leaving." Viserys, wearing a black cloak, climbed on Balerion's back. Dina and Ross already had their own companions, and both insisted on riding their dragons. Boom, boom, boom. Then Balerion took the lead and climbed forward a few steps, then spread his wings and rushed straight into the sky. Roar. Except for the little lady, the other dragons also followed Balerion's steps, roared, spread their wings, and rushed into the sky close to the sea. Chapter 874. The final battle is coming. Viserys set off to return to the East Continent with his 2 children and 4 other dragons. The performance of his children made Viserys feel ashamed, and he sighed that the younger generation pushed the older generation forward. He was already a teenager when he first rode a dragon, but he was still frightened and held tightly to the scales on Balerion's back, afraid of falling and dying. But now Diana can control her dragon very skillfully, and even the boy Heroes, who is only 5 or 6 years old, can also be calm, at least on the surface. As the second brother of the 5 young dragons, Terex is not as irritable as the eldest sister Vaga, but he is much more mature and stable. He flies steadily and holds his head high to protect his little master from wind and rain. With it, heroes will not fall from the sky. The dragon flies very fast, or 1,000 miles a day, and the journey that takes half a month or a month by boat can often be completed in 1 or 2 days. So Viserys goes and comes back quickly. He flew to Pentus and rested for a few days. Although Diana was already 7 or 8 years old, it was her first time to come to the other side of the narrow sea, so she was a little excited. Even the usually introverted heroes became excited. The Black Stone was currently placed deep underground in Pentus, in a small room opened separately. Like the Black Stone, the only White Walker captured in the human world was also imprisoned in Pentus. It was placed in a dragon crystal cage and sunk deep under the sea of the Bay of Pentus. It was guarded by the deep divers, who occasionally took it out of the water for a search and then sank it again. Viserys took Diana and heroes to Pentus to rest for a few days and then took the Black Stone and left to fly to Koha. Because Dragon Crystal has a clear restrictive effect on White Walkers, Viserys was not sure whether it was really effective, but before he left last time, he asked the craftsman of Pentus to use Dragon Crystal to make a small box, which was somewhat similar to a small urn, and then put the Black Stone in it. After the Black Stone was placed in the small box made of Dragon Crystal, some reactions really occurred. A thin layer of frost instantly condensed inside the black box, but that was all. There were no other subsequent changes. Viserys frowned slightly, not knowing why. After seeing that the Black Stone had no other changes, he closed the lid again. Balerion once again expressed his desire to destroy the Black Stone, but was rejected by Viserys. Destroying the Black Stone was the least cost-effective way. Now that the Black Stone was in his hands, destroying it would lose a means. The Valyrian Empire finally took real action in this upcoming decisive battle between humans and the White Walkers. The Imperial family had a total of 8 dragons that could be controlled. However, in the previous war, only one was deployed, and this time 5 dragons were deployed to fly to the battlefield together. On the other side, in the coalition headquarters in Koha, the human coalition was already in a precarious situation. Inside the coalition command room, bang, the door was suddenly pushed open, and a figure walked in and spoke in an impatient voice. Commander-in-Chief, countless whites have come from the east again, and none of the scouts sent out have returned. Robb Stark, a young general, and one of the commanders of the Valyrian Empire army in the human coalition, wore a heavy grey wolf cloak, held the hilt of his sword, and pushed open the door of the command room, and then his voice was a little impatient. Robb Stark is the eldest son of Eddard Stark, the former Guardian of the North. He has been trained as the heir of the Stark family, so he is naturally familiar with military books and strategies. He has been a guard for Viserys for several years, and studied at the Imperial Military Academy in King's Landing, and graduated with honors. Otherwise, with the separation of the Empire's military, politics, and titles, Robb Stark, even if he is the governor of the North, is not qualified to lead an army at such a young age. However, the reality is that Robb's command talent is indeed very high. He made great achievements in the first battle. His troops killed 3 White Walkers, and he killed 1 himself. However, Robb is a little anxious now, because the current situation is not good for the coalition. The dead army from all the occupied areas in the central hinterland of Essos is constantly coming to the direction of Koha, even though the human army once burned more than 200,000 whites in one breath in the Battle of Narsinjal. However, this group of undead seems to be endless, still like a turbulent sea, dark and dense, with no end in sight. The dark clouds of the decisive battle shrouded the sky of Koha. Humans don't know when they have fallen into the encirclement of the White Walkers. Since the human armies all over the world gathered in Koha and began their expedition, they have actually fallen into the trap of the White Walkers. Humans blindly thought that the White Walkers' offensive was slack, and they were powerless, so they hastily started to counterattack and move towards the east. However, they didn't expect that the White Walkers had already set their sights on the main cities in the rear of humans. Only by destroying important human cities such as Bravos and Pentus can the human resistance be completely disintegrated. In fact, the White Walkers had a very good plan, and they were far ahead of the human high-level generals in terms of strategy. After all, there were many famous kings of winter in history among the White Walkers, and each of them was a dragon among men. Moreover, the White Walkers also opened a god's perspective to observe the actions of humans, while humans were completely in the dark about the actions of the White Walkers. Therefore, it was not that there was a mistake in the command level of the human side and they fell into the trap of the White Walkers, but that this was a situation that they had to do. The commanders of the human army had done a good job. When the bad news of the fall of Bravos came, they began to order a retreat as soon as possible. Viserys rode a dragon back to the rear and fought with the Night King over Loras, briefly repelling the opponent. Otherwise the consequences would be disastrous. Before the main force of the human army that was diverted away from the mountain returned, the main cities in the rear had been destroyed by the rolling tide of corpses. Fortunately, Viserys stopped the Night King from destroying the main cities on the west coast of mankind in a flash, so the action strategy of the White Walkers changed, and both sides chose Koha as the place for the decisive battle. The human coalition was forced into a desperate situation and had to choose to fight a decisive battle in Koha, attracting the army of whites to encircle them and prevent them from continuing to destroy human cities, and then use the tactics of blooming in the center to defend and counterattack outward. For the White Walkers, they still have an advantage in strategy, because after the destruction of Bravos and Lorath, the rolling tide of corpses in the west has added hundreds of thousands of new forces, and there are also countless whites in the distant east. When they surround them together, it is time to destroy the main force of the human coalition. Chapter 875 Before the War. If the main force of the human coalition was annihilated in Koha, there would be no resistance in the entire Essos continent that could stop the Night King's army from sweeping across. Whether Viserys died on the Essos continent or escaped back, he would have to accept the result that the East continent had fallen and became a life-forbidden zone. By then, the pressure faced by the Empire would come from all aspects, whether it was from outside the Great Wall in the north, or from enemies on the sea. The final result might be like the ancient and powerful Dawn Kingdom in the Eastern history, which collapsed in the Long Night. By then, there might be a hero like Azor Ahai who stood up to save the whole world, or it would be destroyed. But this is all unacceptable to Viserys. Therefore, as the two sides of the chess game, Viserys and the Night King are the ones who have the clearest view of the whole situation. The teleportation array buried deep underground in Bravos is the backhand and trump card of the White Walkers. They are waiting for the main force of the human coalition to be attracted to the west and suddenly opened, wanting to directly destroy these densely populated important human cities on the west coast of Essos continent. Viserys' trump card is the 8 dragons under his command. Even though the Night King has the help of several ice dragons in terms of top combat power, he is still no match for Viserys. Viserys has been patiently waiting for the Night King to turn over his trump card first, and then mobilize the rest of the dragons to participate in this war, once and for all, to end this war. And now, this opportunity has finally arrived. The White Walkers began to encircle the main force of the coalition forces in Koha from 2 directions. One is Bravos and Lorath, and the other is the hinterland of the central part of Essos. They want to destroy all human resistance in one battle. After all, the White Walkers now have a strategic advantage, and the number of whites is also unknown how many times that of the human army. And Viserys also doesn't want to drag it on any longer, and decides to fight a decisive battle with the White Walkers in Koha, because the White Walkers are firing a gun in the east and a cannon in the west, which is too much pressure on humans, and because the existence of the Long Night has almost destroyed all the social structures of humans except the major city-states, and civilization has begun to collapse, retreating and shrinking significantly. Therefore, the White Walkers did not want to drag it out, and the humans did not want to do it even more. Viserys and the headquarters of the coalition forces in Koha actually knew that the White Walkers were encircling them. They could have retreated to the south before the encirclement of the White Walkers was completed, strategically abandoned Koha to avoid the encirclement of the White Walkers, and continued to entangle with the White Walkers. But unfortunately, time is running out, and there is not much time left for humans. Therefore, even though the coalition forces knew that this battle was a life or death battle, they had to face the enemy head on. They were still firmly rooted in Koha, seizing the time to arrange defenses and prepare for counterattacks, just like a nail, to attract the White Walkers to bite. Even if they could bite it off, they would break a few teeth of the White Walkers. Therefore, in a sense, Viserys and the Night King also had a tacit understanding. It is impossible to beat them in a head-on confrontation. Our enemies are too numerous, and they are tireless, and not afraid of death. In the highest military meeting of the human coalition forces in Koha, the acting commander of the coalition forces was Bessie Joyce, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army, the governor of Pentus, and the captain of Viserys' Kingsguard. The iron-faced god of war quickly secured his position as the commander of the coalition forces with the prestige he won in the Battle of Nasagal, so no one would question his orders and authority now. After all, in addition to the prestige accumulated from the great victory of Nasagal, the Imperial Army directly under Bess's command was also the absolute main force of the coalition forces. The Imperial Army had the largest number of people and the strongest combat effectiveness. Compared with the elite troops of the Empire, the armies of other city-states were like a mob, just standing together. They were far behind in spirit and energy. The Imperial Army was well equipped and had strict military discipline. The commanders of the army were also outstanding students who graduated from the Imperial Military Academy. They were officers from all ranks of the army in the Conquest War. They had systematically learned command strategies and had rich practical experience. After all, Westeros had been in constant turmoil and wars for nearly 10 years. Now in the Dark Command Center, the commanders of the Imperial Army wearing black and red armor were sitting upright, with their helmets placed on the table in front of them. The commanders of other city-states were wearing all kinds of clothes and armor, and some were dressed in colorful clothes like a male peacock seeking a mate, and they kept whispering to each other. It's impossible to hold on. This has been proven before at the Wall, Winterfell, and Moat Cailin. The Seven Kingdoms coalition suffered a series of defeats in Westeros and used blood and tears to warn future generations that blindly defending in the face of the attacks of the White Walkers is also a way to death. Then what should we do? The white-haired old man from the Tiger Party of Volantis, who was also the commander of the Tiger Cloak Army, frowned and spoke. We can't win in a head-on fight, and we can't hold on in a desperate defense. Then aren't we going to die if we stay here? And where is His Majesty the Emperor? Without the help of the dragons, there is no chance of winning. Viserys had left the base camp for a while. After not seeing him for such a long time, the internal morale of the coalition army was inevitably fluctuating. After all, the dragons were the source of confidence and confidence for the human coalition to resist the White Walkers. Even within the Imperial Army, some other voices gradually emerged, wondering if His Majesty had abandoned them and fled to the Summer Sea. Because the long night brought pressure to humans in all aspects. Without light and hope, people's hearts would inevitably become irritable, depressed, and chaotic. Your Majesty is on the way now, and will be back soon. The man who was questioned by the commander of the army of the city-state of Volantis, as the commander of the coalition forces, was wearing silver armor and a silver metal mask, revealing only a pair of eyes. He glanced at the white-haired old man, and then spoke calmly. Your Majesty brought back more dragons from Westeros this time, Vagar, Terex, Merex, etc., to ensure victory in this war. Really? After hearing what Bessie Joyce said, everyone in the meeting room of the cohort coalition couldn't help whispering, and the atmosphere suddenly became eager. That's great. Praise the great Emperor Viserys. With 5 dragons, we will surely win this war. Burn these sons of bitches to death. Even Bonero, the supreme priest of the Red God, couldn't help but smile slightly. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.